Ed stood in front of the first door of the first world he had ever entered. He stared longingly, remembering the faces of his old comrades. Even though 10 years had passed, their faces stayed fresh in his mind like it was just yesterday. Holding the key, he decided to use it, hoping to find a peaceful world waiting on the other side. But before that, let's check where Ed was at this moment. And things weren't looking good. With a grim expression, one of his party members told him he didn't need to show up tomorrow. All four of them looked downcast, but Ed stayed calm and repeated what he had just heard. Trying to stay cool, he asked if they wanted him to take a day off tomorrow. That's when the guy with the goatee lost his temper. He spoke bluntly, saying Ed wasn't needed anymore. That's why he didn't have to come. Ed thought maybe the guy had been drinking too much. But the goatee guy stared right into his eyes and said everyone had agreed to this. It wasn't a sudden decision. The reality started sinking in for Ed. He looked frantically from left to right, asking if this was really happening. Didn't they make a pact to defeat the Demon King? He pleaded with their leader, Hiro-sama, asking if it was some kind of joke. Hiro-sama, the long-haired man, was serious. He admitted Ed was talented, which was why he invited him to the party in the first place. Hiro also acknowledged that in the short time they spent together, Ed had taught and helped him a lot. But then came the deal breaker. Hiro questioned Ed's recent actions. Ed had started to slack off on his tasks and focused more on self-training, frustrating everyone. Compared to the rest of the group training hard for the upcoming battle, Ed was still the same as when he first joined. Hiro held on to hope that Ed would get motivated by those around him. But enough was enough. After hearing all this, Ed just hung his head in shame. Hiro delivered the final blow. Ed was banished from the hero's party. A heavy silence followed before a voice echoed in Ed's mind. Condition met. 10 minutes remaining until return. Suddenly, Ed broke into a huge grin, raised his hand high, and shouted the loudest, "Hell yeah!" Everyone around was shocked. The mage asked, "What the heck is wrong with this dude? Has he finally lost it?" Ed assured them he was fine, saying his wish had finally come true. With a smile, he turned to them and asked if they wanted to receive something. Then, out of thin air, he opened a portal. That surprised everyone in their seats. Ed pulled out several instruction manuals, one for each party member. But the real shock came when their mage swarmed him, asking if he'd had a dimensional storage skill all along. Ed downplayed it, but the mage's eyes got glossy with excitement. She said the skill could be used in so many ways. Ed pushed the manual toward her and told her and the others to read it. One by one, they picked up the manuals and saw that Ed had put together a list of efficient training methods just for them, plus ways to learn new skills based on battles he'd been through. Ed smiled genuinely, hoping they could use it as a reference for their growth in the future. Then, a short-haired girl, probably their healer, raised her hand, asking about a certain magic she was supposed to learn but didn't understand. Ed looked over her shoulder and explained it was something she'd pick up as she grew older. He added that he'd detailed how to do it in the manual for her to read later. She thanked him softly. That's when the goatee guy bombarded Ed with questions about a perfectly drawn map Ed handed him. The map showed detailed layouts of hidden passages and traps no one had noticed before. Ed explained it was just a map of places they'd been, but the goatee guy couldn't believe Ed had drawn a map of somewhere he'd never been. Ed just smiled and said it was a secret. Besides, he wasn't part of the party anymore, so he didn't know any explanations. Finally, Hiro-sama stepped forward and gave Ed a full 90-degree bow, apologizing. Ed hadn't expected that. Hiro admitted he had no idea Ed had been doing all this behind the scenes. Following Hiro's lead, the healer also bowed and apologized for trying to get rid of Ed without knowing his efforts. Ed panicked and refused to be treated like that. Even the goatee guy admitted Ed was doing a better job than him, which was embarrassing, especially since he'd been the one to scold Ed. He apologized too, saying Ed was right. Ed urged them to raise their heads, saying he only did all this out of gratitude for how they treated him and because he wanted to be useful to them long after he was gone. Then their big racked mage said they were taking back their decision to kick Ed out, asking if anyone objected. Hiro-sama looked at Ed with new respect and was about to ask a very important question. Before Hiro-sama could even speak, Ed cut him off with a shake of his head. He said it wasn't that simple to banish someone and then ask them to come back right away. Ed smiled and turned toward the door, telling them he looked forward to seeing them all defeat the Demon King. Without waiting for a response, he dashed out. Even though they called after him, Ed was already sprinting toward the nearby town. The familiar voice echoed in his head again, reminding him he had only 10 seconds left before his return. Excited, he darted past the townsfolk, jumping from rooftop to reach the bell tower. He barely made it with 3 seconds to spare. After checking around, he decided it was the best spot. The voice announced it was beginning the world transmigration. Suddenly, a ray of light enveloped Ed, and in an instant, he was absorbed into it. Moments later, Ed found himself stepping into a puddle of clear water. The world transmigration was complete. He looked around and saw a world of light, with 2 chairs, a table, and an orb on top. In front of him lay countless doors. Stretching, Ed muttered that it had taken him nearly a year to get back here, which felt like a long time. He sat down with a sigh, saying he'd done his best, so now it was up to them to keep their promise to bring him home. Staring at the orb, Ed leaned his head on his hand, frustrated that it wasn't responding. Though disappointed, he wasn't surprised. He stood up and remembered how suddenly he had been transported here long ago. Back then, he was just an ordinary mercenary living a peaceful life. Then, suddenly, he was zapped into this mysterious world filled with white light and a strange book. Right in front of him was a single door, making him wonder out loud what it all meant. But the orb stayed silent, so Ed decided to read the book instead. As he read, Ed learned that he needed to pass through one of these doors to reach another world. There, his mission was to become a companion to the hero of that world. He had to work with them for more than 6 months to earn their trust. Once he was exiled from that hero's party, the conditions would be met, and he could return to the current world. Reading all that made Ed feel depressed. On top of it, there was a rule. Once a door was opened, it could never be opened again. Instead, a new door would appear, leading to a brand new world. Ed sighed deeply, overwhelmed by everything. And of course, there was the huge stack of doors right in front of him. An elephant in the room he couldn't ignore this time. Ed said out loud that it would take him at least 100 years to get through all these doors and be exiled from them. Clenching his fist, he told the orb how he finally did it and asked if it was too much to ask for a little celebration. The man had a point, but as usual, he was met with silence. God still wouldn't answer, which made him sigh again, feeling exasperated. He crouched down and hung his head low, thinking about how it wasn't really that cool, never getting older. Staring at his reflection, he realized time had stopped here, but everywhere else, it kept moving. If he trained, he'd gain muscles. If he ate, he'd gain weight, and his hair would change too. But every time he returned to this world, all those changes reset. He'd go back to the body he had when he first arrived. Looking harder at his reflection, Ed remarked how his body and spirit stayed frozen in their 20s, even though he'd been through over 100 different worlds and adventures. With that thought, he wondered if that made him just another guy who had lived a very long life. Thinking about it more, Ed imagined if he went back home now, he'd be over 100 years old. No one would care about him, not even his mom or the idiots he left behind. The thought made him laugh a little, but then blurred memories of his loved ones flashed through his mind. Not so funny now, was it? Enough with the sappy moments. Ed called out to God, or whatever entity was out there, demanding they keep their promise and take him home. Suddenly, the orb shone brightly, making him turn toward it. Looking at the crystal ball, he remembered how it gave him mysterious powers every time he got evicted from a world. He called these exiled skills, which included things like the Wanderer's Treasure, a strange dimensional storage box that could hold stuff beyond the limits of the worlds he traveled. It also recorded his travel spots on a map only he could see. There were also the Glasses of Seven Nose, which let him see hidden talents in people, and the half-fledged counterfeiter, allowing him to copy anything he'd seen once. Thanks to these powers, an ordinary guy like him had made it into the hero's party. Now, staring at the orb, Ed thought, why not? If it's going to give me a new skill for free, how can I say no? He reached out to touch the orb, and the moment he did, streaks of light zapped into his brain. He realized this was a one-time use ability, too precious to waste until the very last minute. Suddenly, something caught his eye in the distance. He kept watching, thinking that a new door must have appeared. Because of the usual fluctuations in space, doors kept appearing, but this one was different. Ed bolted straight into the newly appearing door, realizing that more doors always popped up right next to the last one. There had never been a door on the other side. Only this time, as he reached it, he saw it was door 0000. This door existed even before the beginning. It was the door that led back to his original world. Ed's face instantly lit up. As he reached for the handle, he thought, if I open this now, I could finally go back to the world where I was born, the one place I've been trying to return to for the past 100 years. But then he paused. Wait, 100 years? Time flows normally in the other worlds, so does that mean 100 years have passed in his real world? If so, everyone he knows and loves would be long gone, just a pile of bones. Suddenly, Ed shouted and called out to God, furious. I've spent the last 100 years dedicating my life to this. In fact, it was stolen from me. All these years I've labored without understanding the reason, purpose, or meaning behind it. I just kept doing the work forced upon me. He continued shouting his ultimatum. Either God makes it up to him, or he just used the skills he'd just acquired right here and now. Was this Ed's reward for everything he'd done? This wasn't a reward at all. He was about to lose it, screaming at the void, but God still said nothing. Suddenly, a book fell from above, landing behind him. Picking it up, Ed wondered if it was the same mysterious book from before. He reached for it, asking God if he wanted him to read it. That's when Ed discovered something astonishing. The digits on the door's number plate represented the amount of time that had passed in the world inside the door. This was a first, but it was true. The numbers were embedded there. Looking at door 0000, below it were 6 zeros. 000000. Wide-eyed, Ed asked himself if this meant he could return to the exact time and place where he had been kidnapped and confined. Could he really go back to that day? He quickly grabbed the handle and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Then, another book fell from the sky and bonked him on the head. Rubbing his head, Ed flipped it open to find a key inside. Underneath, a notice read that it was a commemoration service for his total expulsion. Annoyed, Ed pulled a cokey face. Really, God? A commemoration service for this? How tacky and unwanted. Back to serious matters. The book explained that the key would open the door to any other world he had visited previously, but only once. Using the key, he could revisit any past world and then return to his original world by using the key again on any door in that world. Once he used the key, it would be lost forever. At the same time, the door to world 0000 would finally open, allowing him to see the world he had walked through before. Reading all this, Ed was confused and frustrated. What the heck? If I don't go back to some world, especially the world I originally came from, one open? Thinking about it made him furrow his eyebrows even more. If the conditions for return required him to be exiled again, he'd probably lose his marbles this time. In short, if all he had to do was use the key on a door nearby, it wasn't such a big deal. The important part was to enter a suitable world and come back immediately. Easy peasy. With this logic in mind, Ed's mood lifted. He hopped from one door to the next, wondering in a sing-song voice which door he'd open. That's when he found himself standing in front of door 001, the very first door to the first world he had ever explored. Looking back, he remembered how hard it had been at first. Everything was new, and being thrown into a different world with no clue what was going on was rough. Joining the hero's party, after all, was something only someone branded as a hero could do. And at the same time, the best Ed could manage was being a guard in that area. There was just no way he could get in. The only thing that made it possible for him to join the party was the first exiled skill he got as soon as he transmigrated, Accidental Fog Bearer. That's where fate brought him and the hero together, which solved one problem. But for everything else, Ed had to struggle hard since he didn't have the strength to fight, and didn't even have skills useful to the crew. Not knowing when he'd get kicked out, he made it his mission to be useful. Out of desperation, he took on tasks like arranging lodgings, gathering supplies, carrying luggage, and finding info about their next destination. Basically anything he could think of. Honestly, he had no clue what the others thought of him, but at least he was part of the crew for a year and a half until he was exiled. Now that he thought about it, those guys did kick him out halfway through, but he couldn't help wondering what happened after that. Staring at the door in front of him, the number plate read 10. 10 years had passed, so that meant they'd had enough time to defeat the Demon King. Surely this world was peaceful now, right? A decade was definitely enough to take down the Demon King. Ed felt pretty sure the world was already at peace. With that thought, he decided to just go sightseeing in this world. Tossing the book aside, he started putting the key in the keyhole, thinking this trip was basically forced, but not so bad. If he said out loud how much he hated everything, it wouldn't be a lie because he really did hate it. You couldn't blame him. He'd lived a rough life the first time around. Still, despite all the hard times, Ed admitted there were good moments too. That's why he chose door 001 without hesitation. As he walked into the light, he braced himself to start his journey through different worlds again. Ed found himself standing in a grassy field with mountains not too far off. His eyes scanned the area, wondering if this was really the place. Then he suddenly remembered the key he was holding. Knowing how important it was, Ed quickly tucked it away safely. Losing it would have been terrible. Back in this world, he started recalling the place more clearly. He looked into the distance, remembering how there used to be a tower there. And true to his memory, the Demon King should have been defeated by now. He kept thinking about it, so it made sense to assume no monsters were left around here. But you could never be too sure. Just then, a mound appeared behind him, along with a pair of striking eyes. Ed turned just in time to dodge a blow that followed right after. Speak of the devil. He quickly got into stance and faced a giant rattlesnake. He wondered out loud how such a huge creature was still around. Not that it mattered, because this was the perfect chance for a hero to try something. Ed activated one of his skills, Stranger Box Wanderer's Treasury, and pulled a sword from it. He checked the item, happy to know he could still use Exiled skills just fine. Turning back to the monster, whose fangs were already wide open ready to bite, Ed braced himself with a smirk. He wondered if his next skill would work, and it did. He used Invincible Impregnable Wall, which froze the slithering monster mid-motion, trembling just centimeters away from biting him. Ed stood proud, knowing the monster couldn't reach him that easily. That only made the rattlesnake angrier. It changed tactics, raising its body as high as it could before unleashing some kind of liquid on Ed. Ed stayed unfazed as the monster's magical, dissolving liquid poured all over him. No damage at all. What a way to make our MC pretty OP early on, right? Ed stood there with a smirk, protected by his skill. Magic Absorb, magic curtain of absorption, which saved him from any harm. So yeah, he was still handling both physical and magical attacks like a pro. This time, it was his turn. After finishing off the monster, Ed put his blade back into storage and set off to explore the world, thinking about how he finally remembered what this place was like. At first, he was supposed to join the hero's party, but not anymore. Now he was free to do whatever he wanted, which made his face light up with excitement. And you know what else got him hyped? He realized his wanderer's treasure box was full of gold, silver, and treasures, definitely enough to go shopping. With that in mind, he started imagining what to buy next. Maybe some armor designed to look like the hero's gear, or he could sell steamed buns branded with the hero's name. Everyone knows how marketing works. Anything with a hero's brand is a guaranteed hit. Those ideas got him chuckling until his train of thought was cut short by something catching his eye in the distance. Ed stopped and squinted to get a better look. Shock washed over his face as his body tensed and dashed forward. This couldn't be right. His eyes didn't lie. The ruined walls showed the town was falling apart. He walked closer, wondering if the place had been attacked by a demonic beast. But no, the Demon King should have been defeated by now. Our hero then wondered if this destruction was the result of a war between humans. Everywhere, there was just rubble and debris. As he walked, he thought it made sense that humans might turn against each other after the Demon King's death. But he couldn't believe they'd caused this much damage to themselves in just 10 years. Picking up a broken piece of wood, Ed didn't buy that this was some kind of renovation. So, what the hell happened here? Suddenly a voice called out to him. Ed saw an old man who asked what he was doing there since there was nothing left to scavenge. That stopped Ed in his tracks. The old man was already rummaging through his sack, wondering if he had the wrong info, then threw a small bag at him. He told Ed to be careful, but inside, Ed wanted to explain he wasn't here to scavenge. More importantly, he asked the old man why the town was in such bad shape. The old man looked confused and said it had only been 2 years since it turned into ruins. Then he went on to explain that the town had been completely wiped out by the Demon King's army. That was a shocker. Ed didn't expect to hear Demon King's army and 2 years ago in the same sentence. Curious and alarmed, Ed asked if the Demon King's army was still alive and kicking. The old man explained they had been causing havoc for a long time, and then asked Ed why he didn't know about it, questioning where he had come from. All this was new info for Ed. He had to make sure he heard it right. This had been going on all along? If the Demon King's army was behind this, then what happened to the hero? Ed asked. The old man turned to him, and when Ed mentioned the hero, he said there was a hero named Alexis. Desperation crept into Ed's voice as he recalled how 10 years ago, Prince Alexis was on the verge of defeating the Demon King. The old man finally realized who Ed was talking about. But what Ed heard next wasn't what he expected. Alexis died fighting the Demon King's army 5 years ago. The hero was dead? Ed thought he must have misheard. Alexis couldn't die that easily. He was the hero. But then again, that also explained why such a huge monster was near the town. The older man said the ruined state of the town proved that Alexis was really dead, because if he was still alive, he wouldn't have let this happen. Suddenly, Ed grabbed the old man's shoulder and asked where the other two members of the hero's party were. Where had they gone? Startled by Ed's sudden question, the old man panicked and said, maybe those two died together. He'd never even heard of them being alive. He went on, lamenting how awful it all was, especially since the hero's party had given everyone so much hope. He'd been hearing rumors about how fast the Demon King's army was advancing, but only bits and pieces. Most people didn't know much more. Ed was too stunned to say anything. He sank down onto a nearby boulder, trying to process everything. The old man remarked that it didn't matter if you were a prince or a hero. If you died, that was the end of the story. Then, he said goodbye and urged Ed to keep moving. But Ed was too lost in his thoughts to notice the old man leaving. He was spiraling into a breakdown, unable to believe Alexis was really dead. Alexis was a true hero, not some fake like Ed. Now he wondered what happened after he got exiled. Did they lose? Were they all dead? Ed remembered his fallen comrades, Alexis, Gonzo, and Tia, and asked himself if their defeat was because he had left. Sadness and regret washed over him, refusing to accept that this was how things ended for his former teammates. But on the other hand, he thought, there was no way things would have changed if he hadn't left. He was just a luggage carrier. Thinking otherwise would be too arrogant. Suddenly, he imagined the three of them staring back at him as corpses. To stop himself from spiraling further, Ed decided to confirm the truth with his own eyes. He activated his exile skills and pulled out the Akashic compass, quietly telling the magical object to show him where the hero Alexis died. Instantly, the compass pointed to a location, confirming what he already feared. Then, it pointed north. Ed wondered if that was the direction of the Demon King's castle. Next, he muttered Gonzo's name and asked the compass where Gonzo had died. The compass pointed to the same spot as Alexis, so Ed assumed they had died fighting side by side. Now he questioned why he was even doing this. Was he just going to find their graves and build monuments over them? Finally, he called out the name of the last party member, Tia Lunaria, and asked where she had died. This time, the compass gave him an unexpected answer. Not applicable. That caught Ed's full attention. He jumped up and checked the location the compass was showing. Nervously, he asked where Tia was currently located. The compass showed him an image of a woodland home and pointed him in the right direction. Without wasting a second, Ed activated another exile skill, Hermes Dash, and shot off faster than the eye could see. All he could think about was seeing Tia again. Zooming past the scenery, he held tightly to the hope that she was alive. Because of this, Ed didn't even notice the beautiful surroundings. Desperate to reach her, he activated yet another exile skill, Mirage Shift. He dashed past a flock of geese, making it look like an angel was flying by, a timer counting down above his head. Just like that, Ed crossed the world at breakneck speed, passing mountains, snowy Alps, and monster-filled rock formations that tried to chase him. Suddenly, the timer went off, and the skill ended. But luckily, Ed managed to outrun the swooping winged creatures. Not far away, a voice echoed from the dark castle, calling out to its demon brothers and sisters. The voice encouraged them to march forward and conquer another human town, ending their lives. It urged the Demon King's army to destroy everything in their path, painting a scene that looked straight out of a Lord of the Rings movie. The Demon King's army had orcs and monsters alike, but they weren't prepared for the explosive force zooming right through their ranks. Ed was still in a frenzy, shouting for them to get out of his way. The sheer speed of his run sent both orcs and monsters flying, unable to even process what had just happened. Soon, things settled down and the landscape changed into a peaceful woodland setting. Ed was panting hard from the sprint, but kept moving forward silently, his eyes fixed on the compass pointing north. Finally, he raised his head and saw a home built right into the trunk of a massive tree. He stared in awe. Then it hit him. He didn't have a souvenir for Tia. He patted his clothes and rummaged through his dimensional storage, hoping to find something decent to give her. Finally, his hand touched something soft, and he pulled out a couple of orange fruits. Pretty sure she liked sweet fruits. He put them in a basket to make it more presentable. Standing in front of her door, Ed hesitated. His mind raced with doubts. What would Tia think of his sudden appearance? To her, he was just a troublemaker exiled from the hero's party. Would she greet him with a smile if he just showed up like this? Pushing aside his insecurities, he steeled himself and knocked. Silence. He knocked harder and called out, "Is anyone home?" Still nothing. Growing desperate, He pressed his face against the door. Was she not home? Before he knew it, Ed found himself stepping inside. Either he was too strong, or the door was poorly locked. Panicking, he quickly said he didn't mean to enter without permission. From upstairs came a familiar voice asking, "Who's there?" Ed looked up to see Tia lying on her stomach in the loft. She blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. He mirrored her surprise. She finally sat up and asked, "Is that really you?" Her yellow hair, like the sun, and her jade-colored eyes confirmed it. It was really her. Just as Ed opened his mouth to greet her, Tia jumped up and threw her arms around him. She hugged him tightly, calling his name with excitement. Ed froze, not used to such closeness, but didn't pull away. Tia, oblivious to his discomfort, pinched his cheeks, overwhelmed to see him alive. "I thought I'd never see you alive again," she exclaimed. Ed thought that was a bit dramatic. After all, he was still carrying her in his arms. But then she added, "No one knows who you are now. You were supposed to be famous with the hero's party." Ed couldn't deny it. He leaned back, putting some distance between them, and explained he hadn't wanted to worry anyone or look weak. He said he changed his name and started working in another country, an excuse she accepted easily. After all, he did return to the white world after exile. All doubts melted away when he saw her radiant smile, the way she expressed how glad she was to know he was safe. A soft blush spread across his cheeks. This would have been the perfect shoujo moment, if they weren't in such an awkward position. Ed was close to breaking his back holding her, and Tia was about to fall over. He carefully set her down in the nearest chair. That's when Tia noticed the fruit scattered on the floor. Some had fallen from his basket. Her eyes sparkled as she asked why he had so many. Ed said, "It's my souvenir for you." Flattered, Tia told him there was no bath in her home. How those two facts connect? Well, that's a mystery for another time. Ed got confused too and asked why she'd even bother eating fruit in the bathtub. That's when Tia explained that she always cut and washed fruit in the bath because it smelled nice and made her skin soft and smooth. Ed argued that if she just ate it normally, it would taste just as good. All he got was a judgmental look from her. He insisted it was true and that the fruit was delicious. He even offered to cut some for her, promising it was super sweet. As Tia sat waiting, she suddenly asked why his clothes looked so torn. Ed just laughed it off, saying he'd been traveling around the world trying to find an old lady he once knew. Tia chuckled at that, while Ed wondered why he worked so hard for something like that. She smiled quietly, watching him busy with the fruit. Then she decided to change her clothes and told him to take his time. Once she was out of sight, Ed finally had a moment to think about everything that just happened. Tia was in her pajamas, but then she peeked from behind the curtain and asked if he wanted to change together. He quickly said no. If you couldn't tell, Ed wasn't exactly smooth with women. He knew he'd never been popular, even back then. Just having Tia casually touch him and lean close made him shake. Ed finished cutting the fruit and set it on the table. His eyes wandered around, taking in Tia's home. Then he noticed the 4 chairs before heading to a room hidden by a curtain. When he pulled it aside, he saw 3 futons inside. Suddenly, Tia apologized for making him wait. Ed denied it, but his words got stuck when he saw what she was wearing, her battle suit. She shyly asked if it looked weird. Ed was stunned, wondering why she still wore the same clothes from back then. His mind started racing with questions, overthinking everything. Suddenly, Tia reached out and told him to take off his torn cloak. As she did, she checked if the fruit tasted sour. Ed assured her it didn't. If it did, he promised she could ask him anything. Hearing that, Tia turned to him and asked him to feed her. Ed raised his voice, wondering why, and told her to eat it herself. But she said her hands were full fixing his clothes, so she hoped he'd feed her. She had a point. With a shaky hand, Ed fed her a piece. Tia suddenly cried out that it was sour. Ed panicked. Did he get it wrong? To be sure, he bit a piece himself, his face almost twisting from annoyance. But it was sweet, and Tia was just joking. She giggled as he said her pranks were childish, but she reminded him they used to play like this all the time back then. Ed didn't remember it that way. He thought she mostly teased him, and she probably saw it as being affectionate. When he said that, he complained about how much she teased him, an innocent young guy, almost slipping up and revealing other things. But then he remembered that Tia was an elf over 100 years old, even though she looked young. For her, it was like playing with a small kid. Back then, Ed did everything he could so she wouldn't misunderstand him. Their little party ended in a way Ed didn't like. Instead of losing his cool, he just sighed, realizing he hadn't changed at all. He smiled and said that was just like the woman who had exiled him from the party. Right after saying that, regret filled Ed. He tried to backtrack, saying it wasn't like he held any grudges and was just reminiscing about the old days. Tia replied softly that she was sorry. Ed wasn't done yet. He even gave her a deep 90-degree bow. But Tia's mood had already shifted, her face hanging low. She asked him quietly if he hadn't come to blame her, which left Ed confused. He asked what she meant. Then Tia said she was the only one who survived. Ed just stared at her. After a moment of silence, he asked if she could tell him what happened. She kept sewing his cloak as she explained. Right after Ed left, their party tried to find someone to take his place. But it wasn't easy. They were near the front line fighting the Demon King's army. So, the only ones who answered the recruitment call were people who wanted to fight and get achievements. The heroes' party, though, needed someone to manage their baggage so the fighters could focus. They couldn't get along with anyone who'd just ditch the baggage and go fight. Tia said they hired about 6 people to replace Ed, but every single one quit soon after. In the end, they decided to hire a professional porter, but that person left after just 3 months. Ed thought that was hard to believe, though he knew he was partly to blame for quitting. Tia explained that the professional porter only carried luggage, but Ed had done so much more. Ed had cleaned, cooked, and done other tasks besides carrying bags. Hearing that made Ed remember how much he wanted to stay in the party and tried to prove his worth. Tia continued, saying everyone misunderstood Ed's hard work as the norm. That's why Alexis demanded the same from every new hire. One of the recruits even suggested hiring a servant or maid instead. Alexis didn't like the idea and drove the guy away. Ed thought to himself that if they used him as their standard, the team was bound to get frustrated. Tia said they didn't have much time and only realized Ed's true value after they kicked him out. She grimaced thinking about it. She went back to the story. Things were tough because no one wanted the job anymore. Then one day, a masked person showed up, offering to carry any luggage and happily do chores. Alexis accepted him right away, happy to have found the last piece for the team. With the new recruit, the heroes' party continued their activities and even did well. Eventually, they passed through the demon world and reached the Demon King's domain, where monsters greeted them. Tia had a feeling about what awaited and came prepared, but it didn't matter. The new porter ran away, taking all the healing potions and magic tools. Ed sat up, surprised, and asked if the porter had used a teleportation crystal. Tia nodded. She explained that she had prepared enough supplies for everyone in case they needed to return to the royal capital quickly. The teleportation crystals had to be broken to work, so you didn't want to break them accidentally during a fight. Everyone had handed their crystals to the porter for safekeeping. Ed couldn't believe it, and asked if the porter got scared and just ran off. He didn't think the porter just ran off without a plan. No one would travel through the demon world with the heroes' party all those years just to ditch them. Unless, of course, that person planned to betray them from the start because of their baggage. That thought made Ed even more frustrated. He asked Tia if the porter had deliberately joined the troubled heroes' party, just waiting for a chance to bail. Tia didn't answer and just kept going with the story. They had no choice but to fight when suddenly a demonic beast appeared behind them, coming out of the demon world. Gonzo managed to hold the monster back to protect Tia, but they were clearly trapped with nowhere to run. Gonzo called out to Alexis, and Tia moved to cover him. To avoid the worst outcome, Alexis had a teleportation crystal hidden in the heart of his armor. No matter what happened, he could use it to make sure the hero survived and the world still had hope. Tia urged him to use it and leave since he was the chosen hero, the prince of a great country, and the one everyone was following. But then Alexis put the crystal in Tia's hand and said no hero would ever be so uncool as to abandon his comrades and run away alone. Before she could react, Alexis crushed the crystal, activating its teleportation power and sending her away. Tia started crying, overwhelmed by everything that had happened, while Ed sat there helpless, mourning the loss of their comrades. In the end, Alexis chose his pride over the hero's mission, just like Ed expected, making the wrong choice without hesitation. By now, Tia was full-on sobbing. Ed told her he wasn't the only one who couldn't survive by abandoning friends. After a while, Tia calmed down, and without being asked, she apologized again and thanked him. The story didn't end there. Soon, Tia found herself hiding in a secret room inside the castle of Nlin. Several men crowded around her, demanding to know what happened to Alexis and why she was there. Even worse, they accused her of stealing Alexis's teleportation crystal and running off alone. Then she heard the king's voice. He asked what happened to Alexis, so Tia explained everything. After learning about his son's fate, The king ordered her to hide somewhere far away. He also declared that the hero's party had been wiped out crossing the demon world. Ed was about to react angrily but stopped, realizing this was probably the best move the king could make. Alexis had weighed the future of the world against the lives of his comrades and chose the latter, the only choice he thought was right. But Alexis was still the hero, and Ed couldn't believe he made such a grave mistake. Ed couldn't understand how Alexis went to great lengths to save Tia, but let the others be replaced. Still, all Ed could say was that the king respected his son's last wish. Tia said because of all this, she couldn't join the next 3 expeditions to the demon world. That surprised Ed. Were there really other expeditions? Seeing his surprise, Tia asked how far away he lived if he didn't even know about them. Ed just laughed. Back to the story. Tia said the Allied nations sent forces 3 times to rescue Alexis. Even though they knew no army could break through the demon world, they tried everything for a glimmer of hope, since there were no heroes left to fight. But it was all for nothing. Now that she remembered, Tia said her hiding in the woodland home was a secret. She asked how Ed found this place. Ed said he was just curious about what everyone else was doing and had recently gotten a magical tool that lets him search for people. But when he tried to look for Alexis and Gonzo, the tool didn't respond, which only confirmed what Tia already knew. He apologized for sharing such sad news, but Tia said it was actually refreshing to face reality. Besides, there was no way the 2 of them could survive against such a massive army. Ed was about to call out to her when she showed off his repaired cloak, now beautifully adorned with flowers stitched on it. He smiled back at her. Suddenly, the ground started to shake. Ed quickly checked outside and saw that the lesser dragon had found its way to Tia's home. He wondered if it was a stray that had come down from the mountains, which was quite unusual. Tia came outside too and asked why he had gone out. Before he could answer, she ordered him to get back inside. She would handle the monster herself. As if on cue, the dragon unleashed its fiery breath. Ed was confident he could handle it, but Tia pulled him back just before the attack hit him. She, an elf, summoned a towering wall of water between Ed and the dragon, much to his amazement. Standing firm, Tia vowed that no one would die today and promised to protect Ed. She started chanting her next technique as the lesser dragon flew back to brace for another attack. But before it could sink its claws into Tia, she unleashed a tri-edged stream of water magic, slashing the dragon clean through in one hit. The monster's body fell instantly. Ed was hyped, impressed by Tia's one-hit kill. He admired how sharp and precise her technique was. It cut through not just the dragon's bones, but its scales too. As Ed was gushing over her improvement, Tia reached out, panting, and told him he should get out of there. Seeing her condition, Ed was confused and asked what was wrong. She chuckled and admitted she wanted to look cool and show off, but she got a little too excited. She reassured him she was fine, but Ed knew better. It was obvious she was in bad shape. Tia explained she hadn't fought in so long that her body just wasn't used to it anymore. Throwing a peace sign, she smiled and said she had dressed up in front of Ed to look amazing, and in the end, he just let her be. She climbed onto her loft and remembered she was a member of the hero's party, so she assumed she'd be fine. However, Ed couldn't stop thinking about what she said. Get out of here. What did she really mean by that? Not expecting any easy answers, Ed decided to put off thinking about it for now. First, he'd take care of the dragon's carcass. Looking at the body, Ed decided to store it in the wondrous treasure box since its contents didn't rot. He thought about cutting up the dragon meat when suddenly he heard a loud thud. He peeked inside and called out to Tia, but there was no answer. Going further inside, he asked if something was wrong. Still no response. From below, he called again, asking her to come up. When he finally saw her body lying on the floor, Ed moved closer, asking why she'd fallen. As he carefully turned her over, he was shocked. Tia's upper body was covered with black bruises, spreading from her heart across her torso, like patches of dead skin. She barely managed to whisper, "Close." Ed gently set her on the bed to rest. After some time, he asked how she felt. She said she had calmed down a bit and thanked him for helping her. Feeling guilty that he had found her like this, Ed apologized. Tia said she didn't want to hide it from him. She explained that she had used the elf secret technique when fighting Alexis and the others back then, so they could all survive. This technique drastically boosts spirit magic by fusing one's own life force with the magic. When Ed heard that, his eyes widened, realizing the terrible cost. The price she paid was her own lifespan. Our poor boy had been through so much in one day already. And now hearing that Tia had sacrificed her own life force was even more distressing. Ed wondered how she could be okay just moments ago, and then suddenly collapse. Then he understood. She had poured all of her remaining lifespan into that one attack against the lesser dragon. Tia giggled softly, but said in her defense she thought Ed would have died if she hadn't killed the dragon in one strike. Hearing that made Ed wonder why she thought he was so fragile. That's when he realized she had no idea what he was truly capable of. The elf added that she didn't have much magic or life force to begin with, which explained her frail condition. She wore the special clothes that were the only things keeping her alive. When she wore them, she could share the magic that the tree gathered with her, which enabled her to stay alive. But when she took off those clothes and used that kind of magic without their protection, Tia believed she wouldn't live much longer. Ed didn't understand. What did her clothing have to do with it? Tia chuckled and said she was so happy to see him again that she wanted things to be like before. Unfortunately, she felt she had failed again because she took off her clothes and let the tree's magic slip away. Moreover, the demonic beast had already noticed her, which explained why the lesser dragon had come. Ed fell silent and started blaming himself, thinking everything was his fault. He felt like an ill omen, wondering if this was what happens when someone gets too cocky with their powers. He couldn't believe he had run all the way here to check on Tia, only to find all this. Seeing how stressed Ed was, Tia gently touched his cheek and told him not to wear such a sad face. Pressing her forehead against his, she said that although she may have lived a short life for an elf, she lived it fully, longer than most. More importantly, she had met good friends and got to meet Ed again. Ed didn't like how she talked, as if saying goodbye. Suddenly, Ed felt their presence and slowly got up, telling her he had been working hard on his own ever since being exiled from the group. He shared stories of adventures she couldn't have imagined before, looking her straight in the eye and saying he was strong now. With that, Ed promised he would be the one to protect Tia. Outside her woodland home, Ed saw an army of monsters of all kinds and sizes ready to attack. Even from her bed, Tia could see the countless monsters. But Ed was already walking toward the horde. Before leaving, he assured her he would never leave her alone again. Tia fumbled in bed, desperate to keep Ed from going, but Ed only thought about how she was still trying to stand up for him despite the dire situation. Finally, the time for action had come. Ed swiftly took down the nearest monster in a flash. Though he knew that killing a herd of demonic beasts wouldn't bring back his dead comrades, he refused to end things that way. Ed soon came face to face with a stone golem and activated his skill, blood swordsmithing. Desperately, he wished for a miracle, anything that would allow him to return to the old days before the monsters could react. With a flurry of high-speed slashes and thrusts, Ed took them all down before they could fight back. Then an idea struck him. He had recently gained a one-time exiled skill. He turned to meet Tia's eyes, wondering, if he used that exiled skill, couldn't he just start all over again? The scene shifts to a distant memory. Ed walks into Tia's room and asks if there's something she wants to discuss. He's greeted by the sight of Tia in the middle of taking off her clothes. Ed clutches his chest as she lets out a yell. Next, Ed is on his knees before Tia, while Gonzo and Alexis stand silently in the back. The oven lady expresses disappointment and quickly dismisses Ed from their team, saying he can no longer travel with them. Ed rises wordlessly, and as soon as he leaves, Alexis comments that it was quite an elaborate way to get rid of a hindrance. Tia thinks it's okay. If she didn't do this, Ed would keep following her, and she's at a point where she can't protect him anymore. Clutching her clothes tightly, she knows Ed will hate her for it, but she always wanted him to see the world in peace. Back to the present, Ed sheathes his sword, exhaling deeply now that he's done fighting the monsters. He looks back at Tia with a smile, telling her he was able to protect her. Shocked, Tia asks if he's really that strong. Ed jumps over and briefly explains how he started training again after being expelled from the hero's party. Out of the blue, Tia asks if he could take her to the border of the demon world. Nervous, she quickly adds, "It's fine if he can't." Ed pats her firmly, promising he'll take her even if it's to the end of the world. Feeling her heart swell, she thanks him, while Ed silently tells himself he won't ask her what's in there. Ed knows what's in Tia's heart, so he doesn't ask. Instead, he makes a comfortable seat on his back for her and checks if she feels okay to ride it. When she gives him the go-ahead, they set out on their journey. They travel far and wide, crossing deserts and changing seasons until they reach the place. Ed checks if they're at the right spot, but Tia assures him they are. She asks him to put her down in this barren land, illuminated by 1,000 stars. Tia sits down and starts talking to Alexis and Gonzo, her old comrades, telling them how Ed has grown much stronger than she ever imagined. She even brags about how he managed to pass through the demon world in one night, a feat that was hard for them before. She dares to say Ed might even be stronger than Alexis now, chuckling as she says it. With her head hanging low, Tia asks Ed if he remembers the day she exiled him, and admits she's been thinking about it for a long time. She confesses that she didn't want a weak Ed to die, but also realizes that maybe her real weakness was that she couldn't believe in him. Ed sits next to her and agrees. Together, they look up at the stars as Tia reflects on how Ed, whom she thought she needed to protect, has become strong enough to protect her. She wonders if everyone might have seen a glimpse of peace after the Demon King's defeat. If only she hadn't done anything unnecessary. Ed starts to deny it, but Tia leans her head on his shoulder and thanks him for bringing her there. She wishes she could have granted his wish too. Ed quietly tells her that his wish will come true soon. She takes his hand, intertwining their fingers, and asks what his wish is. Ed replies, "It's been a while since he went home." Tia says she'd like to see his house too. This makes Ed babble about how his mom would be happy to welcome her and that he now needs to buy souvenirs for both his parents. Ed jokes about introducing Tia to any idiots who try to rob him once he makes a lot of money. With his exiled skills, he proclaims he can almost do anything. Tia quietly leans on his side with a smile as Ed continues, saying he can defeat demonic beasts, become an aristocrat, and maybe even a lord of the kingdom one day. But Ed couldn't finish his sentence because Tia had already fallen asleep, resting on his shoulder with a smile. Our hero wonders if this is also part of God's plan. He talks to God, saying he's been doing God's bidding for 100 years, so maybe this is how it ends. This was why he was given all those skills. He throws a punch into the air, proclaiming he'll keep dancing on God's palm until he makes a hole in it. Ed tells the higher being to grant his wish and take everything, his past, future, and everything he has, in exchange. He activates his final exiled skill, unlimited one-time claim. A beam of light zaps him. When Ed opens his eyes, all he sees is white. He's back in the white world, surveying the empty white space with just a chair and table. For a moment, Ed wonders if he's dreaming. Then he bolts upright with a shout, panicking as he realizes this isn't a dream. He asks himself, how did I get here? Was I kidnapped while I was sleeping? Or did I die? First of all, he tells himself to calm down. He tried to assess the situation better by recalling the job he had received that day. It was about exterminating the Clael and pets that were ravaging the fields. After finishing his tasks, he ate lunch and went to a nearby forest to destroy the nest. Later that afternoon, as he was about to recall the next part, he noticed a door standing in the middle of nothingness right behind him. A loud dunk startled him, and he saw a white book had fallen from somewhere. Curiosity got the better of him, so Ed started reading the book. When he finished, he read about how he had been exiled from the world he was in once more. If he wanted to go back, he needed to join the hero's party in 100 different worlds. Only if he got exiled from all of them could he finally return home. No way, he thought. Ed wondered why he needed to get exiled in the first place, and why he had to join a hero's party too. He was just a mere mercenary, so there was no way he could do that. Just then, the sphere started emitting a bright light. He cautiously approached it, remembering what the book said. If he touched it, he'd gain some kind of useful power. It sounded shady, but what else could he do? He just wanted to go home. In the end, Ed confidently touched the sphere. No sooner had he done that than memories, like streaks of light, zapped into his mind. He stood still, wondering what was happening as his exiled skills from before started pouring into him. He noticed these skills weren't all that useful. Suddenly, an image of 3 people with covered faces flashed in his mind. He thought those 3 were from somewhere familiar. Then the sphere zapped all the information he had gathered over the last 100 years right into his mind, leaving him helpless and thunderstruck as all those memories poured in. It was too much. Memories of being exiled by people he had never met, the worlds he had visited. Just when he couldn't take it anymore, another memory flashed. A man telling him not to give up so they could change the past. On all fours, a picture of Tia appeared in his mind as she asked him what he wished for in the future. When it was over, he realized this was his wish. Snickering, he told God that he had outwitted him and won the bet. In exchange for the one-time claim, Ed obtained an essentially impossible power, the power of the 1001. It was the best exiled skill, able even to deceive God. It was another blessing for the second lap. His current self, who had just arrived in the world, inherited all the memories and abilities his future self had acquired back then. Ed knew he could never use the skill again since it was a one-time use, and miracles didn't happen twice. Still, it was enough for him. He touched his shoulder where Tia had leaned, believing he could do it now. Since he had been successfully exiled from all the worlds and now held the strongest power, Ed vowed to change the future into a happy ending. He walked to door 001 to kickstart the second lap, ready to start a new world once again. In contrast to the beautiful town, a man felt distressed after suffering rejection, borderline pleading that he was capable, but Alexis ignored him. Alexis continued slicing a steak, telling the man to use his inside voice and apologizing for rejecting his application. As far as Alexis could see, hiring him would be pointless, though he admitted the guy looked strong enough to carry their supplies if he was interested. The girls behind them were having fun, unaware that Alexis was Hiro-sama. The others wondered if the man Alexis had been talking to was applying to the Heroes Party, especially since Alexis had already rejected 3 people. The girls were still busy gushing about Alexis and failed to notice the hooded man blending in with the crowd, showing intent toward the hero. Alexis turned toward the girls, making them wonder if he was staring at them. The hero felt a nagging feeling deep down. Before he could investigate further, the hooded man suddenly sat down in front of Alexis and introduced himself as the strongest luggage carrier and swordsman. Alexis wondered when the man had moved, but chose instead to ask who he was. By now, all eyes were on them, drawn by the hooded man's sudden appearance. Even Alexis turned serious. And yes, it was our boy Ed. He had decided it was best to create an aura of mystery, hence the hood and enigmatic persona, but he still introduced himself as a wandering adventurer named Ed. Looking back, Ed had actually met Alexis by accident during his first time in town. While wandering around, Ed had clung to Alexis, begging and pleading to join the Heroes Party. Alexis had refused him. It wasn't until Ed offered to work for free that they allowed him to become their luggage carrier. But knowing what he knew now, Ed realized that working merely as the luggage carrier wasn't the best choice. If he stayed that way, he wouldn't have any control over the journey ahead. Back in the present, Alexis asked Ed how he planned to fight if his hands were full carrying their luggage. Ed stood up, holding Alexis's plate of steak, and proposed a demonstration. He said he'd defeat Alexis while carrying the plate in one hand. In his mind, Ed thought it was risky to ignore how things had played out the first time, so he decided to showcase his skill as a swordsman too, hoping Alexis would acknowledge his strength. Grabbing the fork, Alexis thrust it toward the ground with enough force to crack it. Agreeing to Ed's proposal, he said if Ed didn't drop the luggage, he'd consider letting him join the party. That was more than enough for Ed, who even gave Alexis the first move. Before Ed could finish, an object flew straight at his face. Thanks to his godlike reflexes, he blocked the fork just in time. He asked if Alexis was disappointed by the move. The prince only remarked that Ed had a big mouth but some skills too. Just as Alexis was about to say something about the cold steak, Ed cut him off, saying it wasn't very tasty and asked if he wanted to surrender. Alexis went on the offense, but Ed blocked each attack. Their fight continued onto the rooftops, with Alexis attacking using the fork and Ed defending with his sword. In his mind, Ed remembered that the hero accepted all challenges, no matter who or when, to showcase his strength. It was the #1 duty given to him. The hero was strong, and people accepted him because they witnessed that strength firsthand. This was also why it was foretold that the hero would defeat the Demon King, to become a symbol of hope. To stand before the people as their strength, extreme power was necessary. Ed knew that if Alexis lost faith in his strength, he'd never be acknowledged by him. After parrying Alexis's attacks, the fork finally gave in. Standing on the rooftops, Ed taunted Alexis, saying the steak was getting colder and urged the prince to turn up the heat. In his mind, Ed wanted to prove he wasn't just a simple luggage carrier, that Alexis could trust him to have his back. Finally, Alexis drew his sword, acknowledging that Ed was capable of more than he'd thought. Ed braced himself as Alexis lunged forward. Their blades met in a flash, surprising Alexis that Ed could parry his attacks continuously. Once again, Alexis taunted Ed, telling him he could do better. This surely wasn't all the hero had to offer. As the proclaimed hero, the prince decided to rise up to the challenge this time. He aimed a low strike at Ed, who managed to block it just in time. Despite everything, the hero really did have some crazy skills. Ed stepped back after realizing his own sheep sword was no match for Alexis's. He could already feel the sword nearing its limit. It was chipped all over. Then Ed noticed an even bigger problem. The meat slid off his plate. Looking down, he saw Alexis was in a familiar stance, a bright light glowing around him. The hero called Ed out, saying he'd show him a true hero's strike if he was so determined to run his mouth. Alexis unleashed the moonlight sword, a sparkling slash aimed straight at Ed's head. Ed could have easily blocked it with his impregnable fortress technique, but decided not to. He wanted to be recognized as a true companion of the hero, so he braced himself to face the attack head-on with his sword. After all, he'd spent 100 years training for this moment. From the ground, Alexis watched Ed's midair move carefully. When he realized what Ed was about to do, he gave a signal with his palm. Ed focused intensely, matching his swing perfectly to parry the slash. Alexis hummed in approval, impressed by what Ed pulled off. Though Ed's sword was already broken by the time he landed safely, he somehow made it work. Suddenly, cheers erupted from the townsfolk. They praised Ed, amazed by how cool he was. For many, this was the first time they'd seen anyone match the hero's skill. One girl from before looked at Ed differently now, wondering what his name was. A voice answered her, saying his name was Ed, and reminding her that he introduced himself earlier. The older man praised Ed's talent despite being a commoner and asked, "But who exactly is he?" The girls were surprised to hear the random old man speak, but before he could introduce himself, someone kicked him out of the panel. Back with Ed, Alexis walked over and called him out for using such a dangerous move. It could have killed someone. Instead of answering directly, Ed just asked if Alexis really thought he'd let something like that happen. Then a loud voice boomed behind them, calling Ed a straight sprout. Ed turned to see Gonzo looming behind him. Gonzo explained that if the hero's standard screening involved taking serious attacks like that, even he wouldn't make the cut. Ed was about to call him old man, but caught himself and said Gonzo the monk instead. Gonzo went on, saying Alexis was pushing Ed hard and had even signaled him to jump in if things got too dangerous. Setting explanations aside, Gonzo was curious how Ed knew him. Ed started blabbering, saying Gonzo was famous as the world's strongest martial artist with legendary healing hands. That was enough to butter the older man up. Gonzo laughed, bragging about how his muscles were the strongest. Ed found it funny since Gonzo was also the party's frontline healer. Just then, another familiar voice called out to Alexis and Gonzo, asking what they were doing and thinking they were about to leave. Alexis told her he was just showing off a bit of his glory to a stupid commenter and told her to mind her place. She scolded Gonzo for failing to stop Alexis, but he just brushed it off. Ed slowly turned toward the voice, thinking this should be the first time he was hearing it. But hearing it now made his heart swell with nostalgia. Finally, Tia called out to him, asking if he was okay or hurt anywhere. Ed stood silently, staring at her as she introduced herself. Lunaria, an Elish spirit user traveling with Alexis. She spoke about their journey together, while Ed quietly introduced himself as a luggage carrier and swordsman. The three of them gave him strange looks as Ed's vision started to blur. He thought, "Finally, I get to see Tia smile again." But it turned out he didn't realize he was already crying. The sight left the three party members stunned. Tia panicked, asking why he was crying and if it was something she said. But all Ed could think was that Tia was alive, right in front of him. When Ed didn't answer, Tia turned to Alexis, asking what the hero had done to him. Knowing Alexis well, the hero tried to brush off Tia's suspicions. He claimed he hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, though he did take pride in his strength. In fact, Alexis even boasted that his very existence was extraordinary, a classic narcissistic boast. Even Tia couldn't understand what was going on inside the hero's mind. Before the conversation could continue, Ed cut in while still wiping tears from his eyes. He told them it wasn't Alexis's fault. He just felt overwhelmed that the esteemed hero's party had actually asked for his name. Tia wasn't convinced. She asked. Ed expressed frustration, clenching his fists, saying he really wanted to learn about the glory of muscles from Gonzo himself. That was all it took for the older man to side with Ed, promising to take care of Ed the Sprout. Ed knew how to win the old man over. With the majority voting yes, Alexis had no choice but to concede, admitting Ed's swordsmanship was quite good. He even praised Ed, saying he might be the strongest aside from the hero himself. Then Alexis tossed a coin to Ed, telling him that what they really needed was a porter, but Ed was officially part of the party. So Alexis explained that their party didn't really need extra combat strength, but if Ed could handle both roles, porter and fighter, then no one would complain. To test him, Alexis gave Ed a challenge: buy all the necessary goods for their journey and bring them back. He even teased Ed, reminding him to prove that he really was the best baggage carrier. Ed happily accepted the challenge, promising to do his best. As the others left, Ed counted the coins Alexis had given him: 10 gold coins. He remembered that the last time, Alexis had only given him silver coins, so this felt like a sign that the hero trusted him more now. With that amount, Ed could buy a lot of supplies. Just then, Tia's voice came from behind. She commented on how she thought they knew the town well but was surprised by a certain place, reminding Ed she was there too. Ed addressed her more formally as Tia-san, but she quickly corrected him, saying she didn't need honorifics, especially since he had just called her Tia informally a moment ago. Ed explained he called her Tia-san because she was his senpai, but she brushed it off, saying, "Tia is just fine." Then Ed asked why she was tagging along with him. Tia said she was curious, wondering what Ed would do with the money, and told him to stop being so lighthearted. Ed found it a bit careless for her to just follow him, but Tia chuckled and acknowledged that Ed might be as strong as Alexis, and that she was strong too, even if she didn't look it. She added she had a feeling Ed was a good person, which surprised him. He thought about how Tia was usually friendly but didn't always act like this, making him wonder if she had memories from the past too. It wasn't impossible. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Gonzo and Alexis were talking. Gonzo was concerned about whether it was a good idea to let Tia come along, though he trusted Ed not to cause trouble. Alexis cut him off, saying if Tia wanted to come, they should just let her. He said she was free-spirited and probably would ignore any objections anyway. While Alexis worked hard repairing a broken table, Gonzo laughed, knowing Tia was exactly as Alexis described. The old owner of the table approached Alexis, worried about the trouble caused, but Alexis assured him he was fixing it willingly. He stressed owning up to responsibilities, especially if you caused inconvenience. After all that, Alexis praised the craftsmanship of the repaired table, and even the townsfolk agreed the hero had excellent taste. While the crowd admired the handiwork, Alexis told the old man they had to leave because something was bothering him. Back with Ed and Tia, the elven lady asked if something was wrong. Ed hesitated but said it wasn't exactly bothering him. He wondered why Tia was already so comfortable with them, even though they had just met. She seemed to be going out of her way for him, but even Tia didn't know why. She said she had experienced many things and forgotten even more since elves like her lived longer than humans. She was over 100 years old. She added that their kind carved memories they wanted to keep deep in their souls, and even if the memories weren't strong, they lasted through death and rebirth. That's why elves sometimes felt nostalgia meeting a person or visiting a place for the first time. That's how she had felt when she met Ed. Ed wondered if it was déjà vu and thought if it happened to elves, maybe it wasn't limited to them. He asked if she really believed that. Tia shyly admitted she had wondered if they had met before and shared a close bond. Ed smiled and said he wouldn't hold back and would enjoy her company while leading her through the maze of hidden spots in town. In his mind, Ed thought about whether the soul really came with you when you reincarnated. He didn't know if it was true, but since he had reincarnated with full memories and abilities, maybe the memories in the soul started to awaken somewhere else. The only question was how to prove it. Ed and Tia returned to the inn and saw a giant four-angel sculpture towering over the roof. Ed joked, "What in Michelangelo is this?" The roof had been damaged by the moonlight sword. Alexis said he planned to fix it since it had been bothering him, but as usual, he was too special for that. Being special was Alexis's joke. The townsfolk didn't seem to mind. Tia started praising Ed, saying how amazing he was, and that they didn't seem to have any luggage. As soon as she said that, Ed dumped the rations he had bought for the party. He explained that 10 would be preserved for a year, and another 10 for 3 months. Since they weren't leaving town for a while, he only bought preserved rations. Gon was more interested in how Ed managed to fit all those food packs in such a small bag. Ed said it was a magic tool with much bigger capacity than it looked. The catch was that since he picked it up, only he could use it, which wasn't exactly true. The bag turned into a regular one when others touched it, like when Tia tried to fit herself in it in a suggestive way. Ed thought it was better to focus on his tools than his skills. The only reason the bag worked like that was because of his skill Wanderer's treasure trove. By putting the storage entrance at the front, he made it look like a magic bag. He thought Alexis wouldn't see through it. Alexis asked how much Ed could store in the bag. Ed lied again and said he could fit 2 or 3 warehouses inside. He said if we talked about the real capacity, he could probably fit a universe or 2 in there. Tia was super happy showing off Ed's accomplishment, but then they moved on to the next thing he pulled out of the bag. a magical tool that created water. Gonzo and Alexis weren't as impressed with this one. Just then, Alexis asked Tia if she had already told Ed about it, and she said yes. Alexis explained they already had a way to get water, all thanks to Tia's spirit magic. But Tia added that Ed had spent 50 silver coins on it, which made Alexis pause, because it could have cost at least 5 gold coins. Price aside, Alexis looked at Ed, waiting for his reason for buying it. Ed admitted they did have a way to get water wherever they were as long as they had magic and Tia, but he made a point. If Tia got sick or injured, they wouldn't be able to call the spirits. Gonzo and Alexis just realized how much they depended on one person. Alexis's brow furrowed, realizing the risk of relying so much on Tia. He said he'd been too lenient because it was too convenient. Tia took that as an insult, but no one really focused on that. Then Alexis got up and said he acknowledged Ed's skills but thought Tia was the smarter one. So just like that, Alexis kept his word and accepted Ed into the heroes' party. Gonzo, Tia, and Ed celebrated with a 3-way high five. The monk even grabbed Ed by the shoulder, suggesting maybe Ed could fit a piece of adamantine in his bag for Gonzo's training since Gonzo wanted to build muscles. Just then, Alexis noticed something sticking out of Ed's bag and pulled it out. It was a sword Ed had bought for himself. Alexis thought Ed would spend more of their budget on a better sword for himself. He shoved the cheap sword into Ed's chest, claiming it didn't match his talent. The hero scoffed, asking if the cheap sword was some kind of compromise Ed made. Ed shoved it back and said it was just a disposable sword, enough to get him to the next town. Hearing that, Alexis perked up. Ed took the chance to propose an idea. Besides the skills he'd learned on his travels, he'd gotten his hands on some amazing treasures. That got Alexis more interested. After all, this was Ed's second chance, and he was already 6 months ahead of everyone else. Then there were 4 of them, and the heroes' party found themselves on a carriage heading to Torum, a mining and forging town. Tia looked out the window, amazed at all the smokestacks, asking if they were all smelters and how there must be a lot of amazing weapons there. Alexis told her that usually wasn't the case. Soon, they were walking around town, marveling at the sights. Alexis explained that the main thing they manufactured there was silverware. Tia asked if that was the treasure Ed had mentioned, like a knife that made everything taste amazing. Ed quickly dismissed the idea, but admitted it would be pretty cool if something like that existed. Their group headed to an anvil-shaped building called the Silver Stove. As soon as they settled in, Alexis pressed Ed to spill the details. Ed began explaining that his plan was based on reliable information. The mine in Torum seemed to have a den built by a rockworm. The other 3 were shocked to hear that because rockworms devour anything. Everything that has silver in it gets eaten by the rockworm. When Ed first came to this world, he found out these creatures leave huge cracks in the ground when they feed, which can turn into massive caves. But that's not all. He also knew that in 3 months, the rockworm would cause a huge cave-in that would kill many people, causing despair and eventually the town's downfall. When their party arrived back then, they were already too late. Back to the present, Alexis said if that really happened, it would be an extreme situation and asked Ed why he hadn't told the authorities. If it were true, knights should have been sent out right away. But Ed believed they could stop the disaster from happening, so he stayed focused on the now. Ed said he was sure the rockworm was there, even though he had no proof yet. More importantly, he wanted to be the one to defeat it. Since it was a silver-eating rockworm, Alexis finally realized the treasure Ed talked about was actually mithril. Ed confirmed with a sly smile. Tia didn't get the connection and asked Gonzo how rockworms and mithril were related. Like her, Gonzo had no clue and suggested she ask Ed and Alexis directly. Alexis turned to them and asked if they knew about mithril and its properties. Tia explained that mithril conducts and stores mana in large amounts and is pretty rare. She added that many top-tier magical tools and weapons were made from mithril, and she liked how it sparkled. Alexis face-palmed and asked Ed to explain it better. Ed started by saying that when silver is exposed to strong magic for a long time, it turns into mithril. Tia understood that meant the cave was full of mana, but Ed asked why the rockworm mattered if that was the case. She said the mana came from the nearby rockworm, which Ed said was half right. To help her understand, Ed asked what rockworms ate, what metal they mined, and where the mana that turned silver into mithril came from. He explained that for silver to become mithril, it had to be constantly exposed to strong mana, and the best place for that was the rockworm's stomach. In other words, mithril was actually undigested rockworm excrement. That explanation made Tia remember how pretty she thought mithril was, and you could almost feel her world shattering through the screen. Getting back on track, Alexis asked if Ed's plan was to kill the rockworm to get the mithril, but wondered how Ed would use it. Ed smiled and said he planned to make the best possible weapons for the hero's party out of mithril. Tia was still in shock after learning what mithril really was. Soon, the miners were ordered to leave the site. As they were leaving, one man kept telling them to come back, but someone reminded him the hero had ordered an evacuation and forbidden entry for the rest of the day. The hero also promised to compensate for any lost income. Meanwhile, the hero's party was already deep inside the cave. Gonzo wondered if the rockworm was really there, considering how far in they were. Alexis said it probably was, since the feeding grounds should be ahead, based on Ed's info. Ed, on the other hand, was more worried about Tia, asking if she was okay. The oven lady hit him on the arm, calling him out for doubting the method they were about to use. Now Ed seems to be enjoying Tia's reaction when she asks if they can just buy mithril instead. Ed tells her they could buy mithril, but if they had a lot of money, the quality wouldn't be the same as the mithril collected from a rockworm. Tia doesn't understand, so Alexis explains that when silver contacts the potent stomach acid of a rockworm, it undergoes an impeccable refining process that removes all impurities, altering the silver's properties and creating pure mithril. With pure mithril, one can craft exceedingly high-quality weapons, which makes Tia admit she's siding with Ed. But Alexis defends himself by saying he already has the holy sword with him. Turning to Ed, Alexis asks if they're going in the right direction. Ed answers, they're progressing smoothly thanks to his Akashic compass. Gonzo looks over curiously, wondering how the magic compass conveniently points to legendary beasts, but feels bad only Ed can use it. Ed laughs, saying he's the only one who can because he found it. Gonzo asks where the ruins with the magical tools are located, but Ed keeps it a secret. As they continue, Ed suddenly stops and says they've reached the place. Tia doesn't understand since they're at a dead end and wonders if the rockworm is behind the wall. Gonzo, hyped up, says they just need to dig through to the monster and that it's time for his muscles to shine. But Ed tells him to hold off on the bodybuilding exhibition. There's no need. Ed steps forward and kicks the wall, activating his exile skill, Circular Reflector. The others are shocked. Gonzo tells him to stop before he breaks his foot, but Ed says he's fine and keeps kicking, clearly enjoying it. The skill stores the impact, absorbs the shockwaves from each kick, and channels them into a powerful strike. Meanwhile, Tia asks Alexis if he can stop Ed, but Alexis says to wait and see. The ground starts to rumble. Ed tells them to prepare for battle as the rockworm finally emerges, ready to devour them. Gonzo blocks the creature's attack and signals the others to move out. Ed and Alexis dash out of harm's way while Tia begins her enchantment to summon spirit help. Ed and Alexis stab the rockworm, but their attacks barely scratch its thick hide. Tia unleashes her skill, Volcanic Lance, firing it straight at the rockworm. An explosion erupts, burning the monster's mouth. Hurt, the rockworm starts to scurry upward, trying to escape through the roof. Suddenly Ed appears from above, landing on the monster's back. Before anyone can react, the rockworm devours Ed whole. Tia calls out to him, unaware that Ed is unscathed inside the beast's belly. Touching the tip of his blade, Ed unleashes his exile skill, Blood Blade Tempering, intent on gutting the rockworm from within. Outside, Tia is shocked at the sight. Half of the rockworm's body still hangs in the air, and she cries out to Gonzo to help save Ed. Ed started coughing up blood from inside the rockworm but quickly emerged, complaining about how fishy and covered in monster guts he was. Gonzo was shocked, while Alexis gave a small smile, already somewhat expecting Ed to be fine since he willingly let himself get eaten. Ed kept complaining about the stink, but suddenly Tia ran straight into his chest, tears streaming down her face, worried if he was hurt. Ed assured her he was fine. Tia then tearfully asked why he would do something so reckless. Seeing her so worked up made Ed flustered, and he reassured her that if he hadn't done it, the monster would have escaped. He remembered how she was just as worried the first time they met, so he apologized for making her worry. He told her he believed he had to do something and that he could do it. Looking at her, he realized she hadn't changed. She was still Tia. Ed added that he didn't want all their efforts to go to waste. Seeing this, Tia let it go, pouting a little. With that settled, Ed showed them his loot, a chunk of pure mithril. Even though Tia now knew what mithril was, she was still amazed at how sparkly it was. Alexis and Gonzo were impressed too, but Gonzo was skeptical that so little came from such a huge worm. Alexis assured them it was plenty, adding this was the first time he'd ever seen such a large chunk of pure mithril. That made both Tia and Gonzo realize just how valuable it was. Tia asked how much it might be worth if Alexis had never even seen one like this. After thinking, Alexis said it was worth enough to buy a castle because it was extremely rare and one of a kind, but only the very best blacksmith could work with it. Gonzo and Tia were lost in thoughts about how priceless the mithril was, and Gonzo started dreaming about how many strength training tools he could buy. Alexis had to tell them to get a hold of themselves. Then Alexis asked Ed if he had a blacksmith in mind to work on the mithril. Ed smiled and said he planned to forge it himself since he was a decent blacksmith, which left Alexis shocked. A porter combatant who's also a blacksmith? Alexis's mouth hung open. The party went back to Silver Forge, where Alexis rented a blacksmith's workspace so Ed could work on the mithril. Ed got excited, admiring the furnace and tools, and asked the owner if he could use them. The owner said they could use it for free, considering the party saved the town, but Alexis refused to take advantage of him. The owner was grateful. Alexis told Ed to start working, but warned that if he didn't put his heart into it, their efforts would be wasted. Leaning closer, Alexis asked if Ed was properly prepared, to which Ed replied with a confident smile. Alexis told Gonzo and Tia to go, but Tia stayed behind, admiring Ed quietly from her seat. Before Alexis left, he commented on how much interest she had taken in Ed. Though Alexis trusted her judgment of character, he couldn't help but think she was too fond of Ed, even if she didn't understand why. Alexis smiled at her as he left, then went to the nearest pub with Gonzo. Gonzo wondered if Alexis was really in a position to ask Tia questions about her feelings when he himself seemed fond of Ed. Gonzo pointed out that was why Alexis trusted Ed to lead them and entrusted him with so much. Unusual, since Alexis usually doesn't trust others easily. Alexis was quiet for a moment, then told Gonzo that he'd been observing Ed closely since he joined. And besides being a skilled swordsman like him, he kept talking about how Ed used mysterious magical artifacts that only he could handle. Plus, Ed seemed to have an invaluable source of information, not just about the monsters, but also about how to deal with them. That made Ed all the more impressive to Alexis. So, yeah, he admitted he might be a little fond of Ed, which made Gonzo laugh out loud since he already knew how the hero was. Back to Ed, he told Tia he was fine on his own and asked if she wouldn't get bored watching blacksmithing. Tia giggled and clarified she was there to watch him, not the forging itself, which caught Ed off guard. Did that mean she was always watching him? She didn't exactly deny it and said it was because she believed he could do anything. As soon as she said that, the image of Tia from his past life flashed through his mind, and Ed looked grim. He told her there were a lot of things he couldn't do. Staring at his hand with a defeated expression, he said he had let the most precious things slip through his fingers, time and time again, even when they should have been easy to hold on to. Then Ed went back to work silently, promising himself he wouldn't make the same mistake again. This time, he'd make sure things ended differently. Using the skills he'd gained with his own hands, Ed started working on the mithril, thinking about how he'd shape his future and change the outcome. With his hands, he vowed to craft a weapon that would alter fate. A floating eye appeared, welcoming a man with his back to the camera, calling him San. Finally, there was a new face. The eye reported how the hero had come and defeated the rockworm, while San noticed the body was still stiff. Not that it mattered much. This man had a grim look as he said it would be a pain dealing with them. Luckily, he was in charge of recon this time, and more than anything, he had to report to the Demon Lord. The scene shifted to a flashback of Ed carrying Tia on his back toward the place where the hero died. While running, he asked her what the porter they hired was like. Tia tried to remember, recalling he looked like any normal guy but had a distinct nose. She couldn't remember his name. It was redacted. That's when Tia woke up, still feeling dazed. The oven lady kept having the same dream about her and Ed living a different life and walking a different path. She wondered why she kept dreaming that, especially since she'd only just met Ed. Speaking of Ed, he turned to ask if he'd woken her up. Tia said she had just dozed off on her own. Ed suggested she go to bed to get proper rest, but Tia kept thinking about how he'd burst into tears the moment he saw her face. Unknown to him, she found their meeting heartbreaking too, but now all she could think about was how being with him felt warm. Tia refused Ed's suggestion, saying she wanted to watch him a little longer, so he kept forging. Just then, he thought about taking a water break since he was sweaty, but suddenly stopped himself. Ed remembered he couldn't carry all the treasures and travel footprints he'd gathered over the past 100 years. That was why he had to rebuild his sword in the first place. At least his abilities and memories were still with him. He conjured the Akashic compass, which pointed west. Ed pulled a grim face. Outside their workplace, Scion and the floating eye observed Ed from afar, sizing him up as the human causing the anomalies and disturbances in the hero's party. According to their intel, this human was supposed to be a porter, but for some reason he was forging. His actions were just way too inconsistent. Meanwhile, the flying eye kept insisting they should kill Kanan, but Kanan decided to keep watching him a little longer. As he got up, he complained about always having to take human form with the same face and body, like he had no control over it. Could you even call it a form if you couldn't change it? Because of that, he knew he had to be extra careful. If his cover was blown, it would threaten their future plans. Hearing this, the floating eyeball teased him about his inability to change his appearance. Suddenly, Kanan turned to it more seriously and started to transform, telling the eye to show more respect since his rank was higher. His body morphed into a shadow lizard as he told the creature to wait while he gathered more information to report to the Demon King. The next day, the sun was high when Alexis and Gonzo returned to ask Ed if he'd finished forging the weapons out of mithril. Gonzo was shocked that Ed managed to finish so quickly, but Ed explained he'd been busy working non-stop, whenever he wasn't eating or sleeping. Alexis just narrowed his eyes and asked if that was really enough to impress him. Ed confidently said he'd made the ultimate weapon, a bold claim, but knowing what he'd been through, it sounded true. Gonzo got even more excited, but Ed stopped him, saying they needed a place to show it off first. He pulled out his Akashic compass, which made Tia ask what he planned to do with it. Ed then shared his plans with the hero's party. Meanwhile, Kanan kept spying from a distance, trying to get a good look at the new weapons Ed had made. A sword, a gauntlet, and a silver staff. None of them seemed like a threat, except maybe Alexis's holy sword, but still, Kanan had a strange feeling in his gut. In the end, he decided to do more recon. Suddenly, he noticed Ed was already looking straight at him. We all knew that look. It meant trouble. Kanan froze, quickly hiding behind a pillar, wondering if he'd really been spotted or if it was just a coincidence. Instead of waiting, he shifted into his shadow bat form and flew off to report to the Demon King. Kanan was already panicking, thinking there was something off about the new guy. For one, even the hero couldn't sense him, so how could this new party member be detected? Plus, there was the look in Ed's eyes, like he was hunting prey. Kanan tried to deny it, telling himself it was the other way around, but he was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't notice the ice blades flying from below. The blades pierced his wings, and Kanan crashed to the ground. Stunned, he was starting to realize he'd been hit by an ice arrow made of spirit magic, something impossible to shoot from that distance. Then a pair of feet appeared in front of him, followed by a voice calling him General. The voice said they'd always wanted to meet Kanan, but never expected it to happen so soon. Ed squatted down in front of the fallen Kanan and even called his name, surprising him. How did this new guy know his name? Ed caught himself and asked if Kanan's name was supposed to be a secret, apologizing for slipping up. But none of that mattered because Ed had a wild look in his eyes and told Kanan there was no point in keeping quiet. Kanan was about to deny everything when Gonzo and Tia suddenly appeared, asking Ed how it went. Ed praised Tia for her perfect shot, impressed that she'd hit Kanan from such a distance. While some of the hero's party chatted, a million thoughts raced through Kanan's mind. What was this guy? And how had they managed to hit him from so far away? But more importantly, did that mean Kanan had actually been the one being watched this whole time, not the other way around? Gonzo looked down at Kanan and asked Ed to confirm if the creature on the ground really was a demon scout. Ed agreed and added that doing recon was vital for the enemy. Tia joined in too, leaning down and asking what they planned to do next. Suddenly, Kanan shifted into a human form and told them he was actually an envoy of the Demon King, still kneeling. Envoy, my foot, Ed thought. Noticing that Alexis was nowhere around, Kanan said he had a message for the hero. He started by saying the Demon King had a proposal for a better future together, but Ed quickly cut him off, saying the hero wasn't coming. Ed added that Alexis was giving them a chance to show off while the hero was busy evacuating the area's residents. Putting hero business aside, Ed sarcastically brushed off Kanan's talk about the future, saying it was so funny it brought tears to his eyes. With a determined look, Ed told Kanan he planned to crush the future they dreamed of, right here and now. Kanan laughed loudly at the idea, calling Ed a lowly human with big words. Then, sensing his moment, Kanan started to transform, ready to attack since the hero wasn't there to protect them. His voice grew deeper and louder, and his body grew bigger as he scoffed at Ed for looking down on him. Finally, Kanan's true form appeared, a giant roach-like monster towering over Ed, Tia, and Gonzo. Tia and Gonzo got ready to fight, while Ed looked annoyed that Alexis chose evacuation duty instead of being here. Suddenly, Kanan attacked with his claws, aiming to crush them. A loud crash echoed around as Gonzo activated his aura shield, and Tia and Ed dodged the attack. Kanan ranted about how much he hated Ed, especially since Ed made him reveal his violent form. Then Kanan readied another attack, vowing not to stop until the town was destroyed. A bright flash lit up the area as Kanan unleashed his attack. Ed called out to Gonzo, asking if the old man was okay using the gauntlet like that. Gonzo assured him he was fine and reactivated his aura shield. Before Kanan's attack could hit the town, Gonzo's barrier blocked it. Kanan nearly lost it, stunned that Gonzo managed to create a shield big enough to protect the whole town. According to his intel, something that powerful should have been impossible. 3 of the heroes stood firm, with Gonzo lowering his stance to show off his new gauntlet. Alexis watched the fight from a high building, wondering if a new weapon could really make such a difference, and who Ed really was. Earlier, Alexis remembered how Ed had handed Gonzo a pair of gauntlets and told him to focus his mana into his fists. Back in the fight, Kanan lunged at Gonzo, looking down on them for being mere humans, but Gonzo was ready, channeling all his mana into his fists before releasing it all at once. The result? Gonzo smashed off Kanan's entire right arm, leaving the villain speechless. Even Tia was amazed at how the monster's arm exploded. Gonzo felt giddy and praised Ed for being the best. For the first time, Kanan realized he was facing really strong opponents, way stronger than he expected. What shocked him even more was that they were already this powerful, even without the hero around. Meanwhile, Gonzo fully believed his muscles had finally reached their peak, ready to execute another powerful move. But Saiyan's mind was elsewhere, wondering why all this was happening. Was it all because of Ed? This urgent information had to be reported immediately. In a flashy exit, Kanan used a massive explosion that made Gonzo think he'd blown himself up. But Ed knew better. He realized Kanan used the explosion as a distraction and burrowed underground. Sure enough, Kanan had shapeshifted into a rockworm and was digging deeper, confident the hero's party couldn't chase him. Before Kanan could escape, a stone figure grabbed him tightly. This was Tia's technique, rockbind, amplified thanks to the mithril sword Ed forged for her. Ed explained that by infusing spirit magic into the sword's blade, Tia could unleash elemental power through her slashes. Gonzo was fired up, surprised that Tia could use such a powerful technique, but she clarified that it was a simple spell to trap enemies in stone. The sword just made it much stronger. Meanwhile, Kanan remained trapped in the stone embrace. Ed approached calmly, staff in hand, with an unreadable expression. He told Kanan he knew what he was about to do next, and spoke of lingering regrets. Ed said he wouldn't forget them, even if he died and was reborn again, confusing Kanan. Ed admitted Kanan might not understand, but explained this was his atonement. This enraged Kanan, who demanded to know where someone like Ed even came from. At that moment, Ed recalled the peaceful face of Tia as she died, and he revealed to Kanan that he came from that future. Then Ed unleashed his deadly technique, the silver-winged sword. In 12 swift slashes, the blades cut through Kanan's massive body. It was over as soon as it began. The wings on Ed's staff folded back into their normal form, marking the finishing blow. Ed looked to the sky, then down at his clenched fist, wondering if it was truly over. Alexis, Tia, and Gonzo ran up to him, worried. Seeing them rush over made Ed smile. He bragged about his new sword and sword manipulation, which made Tia and Gonzo call him out for being smug. The two approached Kanan's body. Tia doubted he was really dead. It didn't look like it. Alexis told her to look closer. He pointed out the cut was nearly invisible and that the surface of the wound was frighteningly smooth. From this, Alexis assumed Kanan died without even realizing he was cut. Turning to Ed, Alexis said that no one could do something like that unless they were a skilled swordsman with a great sword. Ed, feeling a little shy, brushed off the compliment, saying it was just a makeshift solution. Alexis's voice grew serious as he reminded Ed that he was the hero, a title not given lightly. As far as Alexis knew, no craftsman could create weapons comparable to those Ed used, yet Ed still called it a makeshift solution. So what else could the real deal even do? In the end, Alexis finally asked him the big question. Who exactly was Ed, and what was he hiding? Alexis had been the hero of the story, chosen by the Holy Sword and seen by everyone as humanity's only hope to beat the Demon King. And with a title like that, sometimes that pride turned into cold arrogance. At that moment, Alexis stared down at Ed with a sharp, almost judging look. If Ed had to be honest, that kind of expression didn't really suit someone like Alexis. Still, that magnetic, powerful man had just asked if Ed was keeping secrets, and it actually made Ed hesitate for a second. Maybe he had gone a bit too far this time, so he tried to stay cool even though the question caught him off guard. Then Alexis pointed at Ed's sword and commented on how it didn't look normal. He said it clearly wasn't just a regular mithril-style weapon. There had to be more to it. Even though Alexis didn't know exactly how it worked, he believed that the staff could shift into an insanely sharp blade. There was a short silence before Ed admitted that Alexis was spot on. The mithril sword could form wings on one side and a razor-sharp edge on the other. It reached its peak sharpness when it had 12 wings. Ed explained that was pretty much it. Pushing it any further would just make the blade shatter easily. But in his mind, Ed didn't tell the whole truth. The blade didn't shape itself through magic. It worked because of an exiled skill called Master Smith. Still, Ed complimented Alexis, saying his observation skills were impressive. He had figured all of that out just by looking once. But Alexis wasn't done yet. He asked Ed another question, this time more serious. What was his ultimate goal as a blacksmith? Ah, so that was what he really meant. Ed figured his secret was still safe and played along, saying he just wanted to craft a sword that could cut through anything. But Alexis didn't buy it. He called that a typical answer, especially since he knew Ed had the actual talent to make such a sword. Then Tia jumped into the conversation. She asked Alexis why he believed that, and Alexis answered quickly. He pointed out that Ed had called his sword a temporary fix, not a prototype or a test run. That suggested Ed could have made something even better if he had proper conditions. That led to a more important question. Why had Ed been in such a rush? After all, he claimed he was building the best sword in the world. Was it just missing materials? Or tools? Ed ended up revealing that his biggest problem was the materials. He didn't go into detail, but made it clear that making a top-tier sword with what he had was basically impossible. Plus, he couldn't just go out and buy what he needed. The truth was, the things he required came from other worlds entirely. Alexis didn't press him further. He just let out a hum and said they should head back to clean up the mess they'd made. They still had a city wall to repair. Though if Alexis took charge, it should be done in no time. But just as he turned to leave, Tia stopped him. She said she and Gonzo would handle the wall themselves. Her eyes narrowed a little as she said it, making Alexis pause and raise a brow in confusion. Instead of answering him, Tia and Gonzo bolted, leaving Ed standing there with Alexis. Just as Ed was about to leave too, Alexis placed a hand on his shoulder. He said he had a favor to ask and wanted Ed to come to his room for a private talk. That simple request made Ed freeze, completely out of character for him. Meanwhile, Tia was already off fixing the town wall using one of her skills. Tia had been using those giant summoned hands of hers, massive ethereal limbs, to lift a huge boulder when the townsfolk noticed her. She lowered her head slightly in apology for putting a hole in their wall, but they quickly waved it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. Instead, they began showering her with praise. Tia was just about to brush it off, saying it was only natural to help out when needed, but the cheering suddenly shifted. They started shouting about how the Demon Lord didn't stand a chance now that they had heroes like her on their side. That wave of hope and expectation hit her like a brick. The pressure came rushing back. Still, she smiled gently and told them they'd do everything they could to bring peace to the world. And if you can't beat the hype, you might as well join it. That's exactly what Tia did. She leaned into the energy, letting the villagers' encouragement fuel her resolve. Right then, Gonzo stepped in with a laugh so loud it echoed across the square. He declared that a noisy bunch like this wasn't even worthy of facing off against his muscles. To prove it, he lifted the massive boulder over his head like it was a pillow, leaving everyone gaping. He dropped it down without flinching, and the crowd stared in awe. The guy was the literal definition of brute strength. Then Gonzo walked over to Tia, gave her a reassuring pat on the head, and told her it was totally normal for people to expect more from them as they did more. It came with the territory. That's the burden heroes carried. Still, he urged her not to carry it alone, especially when he was around. She didn't have to act strong every single moment. Besides, he said, they'd gotten way tougher since Ed joined their party. With that same fire in his eyes, Gonzo told her they would beat the Demon Lord. Hearing that grounded Tia again. She smiled at him, genuinely thankful. though a part of her couldn't help but wonder where the other two had gone off to. But before anyone could worry about the demon lord, Ed had his own mini-boss fight with his nerves. He was sitting stiff as a board, trying to figure out what Alexis even wanted from him. Alexis had offered him some black tea, mentioning how he tried to make it like the kind they had before, even if he wasn't sure Ed would like it. But Ed just nodded, saying it was fine, all while trying not to overthink the situation. Honestly, the way Alexis had brought him up to his room and was treating him so politely, it felt like something big was about to drop. Ed couldn't shake the feeling that this was leading to something serious, maybe even another exile. Finally, unable to take the tension anymore, Ed asked what this was all about. That's when Alexis handed him something surprising, the holy sword. Ed froze. Alexis actually wanted him to look at his weapon? And not just look, he told Ed he could draw it too. That was the part that shocked Ed most. He'd seen that sword countless times in battle, but never once had he touched it. Alexis hated when others laid hands on it. As Ed slowly drew the blade, he was about to speak but stopped himself when Alexis asked what he thought of it. Ed gave a basic answer at first. Yeah, it was exactly what you'd expect from a holy sword. But Alexis interrupted him and asked if he thought it deserved to be called an incredible sword. That question threw Ed off. In his mind, he had to admit, it was definitely made using some of the best techniques he'd ever seen. There was no way he could replicate something like this with the skills he had right now. But even before Ed could finish that thought, Alexis let out a sigh. Ed already knew, deep down, this wasn't the real holy sword. Sure, it might have been the best weapon ever made by human hands, but something about it just didn't feel right. It was still just a copy in his mind. Ed had thought that if he gave it everything he had, maybe he could recreate something like it with his master smith skills. But no matter what, it wouldn't be the true holy sword. He turned to Alexis and asked where the real one was. Alexis looked away and said he didn't know. They'd done everything they could, sent teams everywhere, but nothing came up. After hearing that, Ed understood that this sword was just standing in for the real thing. Alexis explained that if the demon lord ever figured out it was fake, they'd do anything to find the real one first. And once they did, humanity would be out of chances. Alexis added that he'd been hiding the truth all this time, relying on the sword's power, but even he could feel it weakening. There wasn't anyone left who could make a sword like that anymore. Until Ed showed up. Alexis was sure from the start that Ed could create something even stronger. Ed went quiet, thinking it through. Maybe if he used everything he'd learned since coming to this world, along with his discarded skills, he could have made a better sword. But still, it'd just be another fake. It would never match the real one. He started to tell Alexis he was grateful for the trust, and was about to turn him down, when Alexis suddenly bowed his head. The proud Alexis actually lowered himself. That surprised Ed. Alexis went on, saying he'd give Ed anything he needed. Materials, tools, whatever, if he could just forge him a sword and let him stay the hero. Ed told him to stop, saying someone like him didn't deserve a bow. But Alexis said he'd bow 100 times if needed. He carried everyone's future on his shoulders. If he failed, the whole world would fail. He couldn't let that happen. He had to keep being their hope. Seeing that, Ed asked why he was pushing himself so hard. He hadn't chosen to be a hero. It was forced on him. To everyone else, he was just a tool to carry the burden. Ed knew Alexis realized that. So why was he still doing it? Alexis said it was because he was different. He believed he could gain anything, achieve anything, no matter how impossible. That was his reason for existing. To give people hope that peace was still possible. He asked Ed to let him continue being their hero with a sword made by his hands. Alexis wasn't proud because he thought he was better than others. He was proud because he needed to live up to being chosen. He looked down on people, not out of arrogance, but because he knew the weight of his role. Ed admitted to himself that he'd misunderstood him. He told Alexis he understood now. But still, his own work didn't deserve a hero like him. Then he showed him the Akashic compass and said he wanted to find the real holy sword. Alexis lifted his head a little and asked if the compass wasn't just for locating magical beasts. Ed apologized for lying. Alexis already knew Ed had some secrets. Ed figured if the compass's true ability got out, getting exiled later would be harder. Still, after seeing Alexis's determination, he couldn't ignore it. What kind of man would that make him? The compass pointed north, and Ed offered to help find the holy sword. In return, the reward would be defeating the demon lord and bringing peace. Alexis smiled, saying Ed never failed to surprise him. He looked Ed in the eye and said he'd pay any price. asking him to lead them. Ed bowed and called him Hiro-sama. Alexis corrected him, saying to just call him Alexis. He added that he didn't plan to treat someone he bowed to like a porter. Just like Gonzo and Tia, Ed was now one of the true party members. Ed was surprised but smiled, called him by name, and shook his hand. He'd finally become part of the hero's family. The town wall was repaired in a single day. The townspeople admired the elf lady's work. Even though it was a basic repair, they were amazed. Spirit magic made it stronger than before. The hero's party walked by, and the locals called out to Tia, inviting her to stay longer. She declined, saying they had to move on. Still, the townsfolk asked her to accept their thanks. They revealed a statue they made in her honor. They placed it beside her rockbind pose, hugging the rockworm. Tia stared at it blankly while Ed and Gonzo tried not to laugh. One man said he'd never forget what she did, even if he wasn't there to see it. Tia pointed out Gonzo was there too, so why didn't he get a statue? Alexis looked at the statue and said it lacked something. He suggested lighting it with rainbow colors from below. Tia was even more embarrassed. Alexis turned to Ed and told him to lead the way. The party began their journey to find the true holy sword. The compass showed direction, not distance. The path wasn't easy. No matter the terrain, they followed it. They reached a cave, but it was a dead end. They kept going. It was tiring, but Ed enjoyed seeing places he missed before. It took them 3 months to reach their goal. They arrived at a misty forest between mountains in the northern frontier. After walking a while, Gonzo said they had passed the same spot before. Ed said they were on track and asked Tia about the mist. It didn't clear no matter what. Tia checked and said the forest was under a strong illusion. If they broke it wrong, another would appear. She added that the mana was acting strangely, as if reacting to something. If what they were looking for was here, they were getting close. Since Alexis was with them, the 3 men exchanged glances before Alexis finally smiled. It seemed like they'd reached the right place. Gonzo shared some of his good food, but reminded the hero to stay alert, especially after what had happened last month. Even Tia was still upset about whatever went down in that cave, but Ed's attention was fixed straight ahead. They stepped onto a patterned open ground flanked by stone golems with swords in hand. At the center stood a column of water, and right in the middle of it, half buried in the ground, was the weapon they'd been searching for. Ed was about to ask if that was the holy sword when Alexis began reciting an old saying, "Deep in the hidden forest, at the innermost spring, rests the hero's strength." Now that he was standing before it, Alexis realized that the hero had to come in person to find the sword. No wonder no one else had ever found it. Tia and Gonzo clapped him on the back, encouraging him to pull it out. Alexis turned to Ed and thanked him, saying they wouldn't have gotten this far without him. Ed just smiled and reminded him of the promise they'd made, then told him to go ahead and pull the sword. But instead, Alexis surprised him by saying Ed should try it first. After all, what if he was the real hero? If only the true hero could draw the sword, and Ed managed to do it, wouldn't that make him the chosen one? Ed looked unsure, but he didn't back down. The idea got Gonzo and Tia fired up too. Ed stepped forward and grabbed the handle, pulling with all his strength. But the sword didn't move an inch. He even thought about using a storage box to take the whole platform, but that wouldn't count. Next up was Gonzo. He marched over and gave it everything he had, refusing to let his muscles lose to a rock. But even he couldn't budge the sword. Then Tia stepped forward and gave it a shot, but she also failed, just as Alexis had expected. Finally, Alexis walked up to it, ready for his King Arthur moment. He touched the handle, and the others grew restless from all the suspense. Gonzo was surprised to see Alexis this nervous, but still believed in him. When Alexis tried to pull, the sword shifted slightly, and everyone started cheering him on. Their cheering annoyed him. Wasn't this supposed to be a serious, legendary moment? Then a mysterious voice echoed out, asking who dared to touch the sword and if he was truly a hero. Before he could respond, Alexis suddenly found himself standing inside a castle. Back on the day he was born, he saw his mother holding him, naming him Alexis. She smiled down at him and said the whole world would one day know his name because he was her precious child. Back in reality, Alexis stood frozen in front of the sword, and the others started getting worried. He hadn't moved at all since touching it. Ed stepped toward him, asking if he was okay, then suddenly sensed an attack. Thanks to his sharp reflexes, Ed dodged just in time as a massive stone hand smashed down where he'd just stood. He leapt back beside Gonzo and Tia. Gonzo asked if this was a trap, just as the golems began to stir. Ed shouted at Alexis, trying to snap him out of it, but Tia said it was no use. There was powerful magic at work. Judging by the signs, Alexis's consciousness had been taken somewhere far from here. The golems were there to prevent anyone from interrupting the hero's trial. Back in Alexis's vision, he watched his younger self ask his mother to read him a book, making her giggle at his excitement. The young Alexis eagerly told her how much he loved the story about the hero defeating the Demon King and saving the world, promising he would be a hero like that one day. Alexis smiled at the memory, but the scene quickly shifted to him standing before his mother's casket. Since then, the young Alexis had trained relentlessly to become the hero she believed he was destined to be. But when he first met Gonzo, the monk made him realize he wasn't special. Alexis tried to defeat Gonzo, but the monk easily blocked his attacks, reminding him he was just a boy. Meanwhile, in real time, Gonzo, Tia, and Ed fought the golems. Despite their strength, the golems were tough and powerful. Tia suggested targeting the magic animating the golems since physical attacks were ineffective, passing the task to Ed. Ed quickly understood and slashed the golem's shin, while Tia struck its chest. Amid the chaos, Alexis remained motionless in the center, prompting Gonzo to shout at him, asking how long he planned to space out. Back in Alexis's vision of his hero trial, he saw the day he finally bested Gonzo. He reflected on how he refused to give up despite the monk's warnings that he was just a boy. Unsure if it was delusion, nostalgia, or stubbornness, Alexis pressed on. Eventually, the day came when Alexis was crowned hero, signaling humanity's final stand against the Demon Lord. As he knelt to receive the title, he wondered if this was truly what he wanted. Soon after, he met Tia, praising her magical talents and asking her to join him as a companion. But not everyone could keep up with him. Then a different memory appeared. Alexis telling Tia about a plan to eliminate a hindrance. It was from his past life. Tia explained that if she didn't act, Ed would have followed her and she couldn't protect him anymore. Alexis grew confused seeing this vision of him and Tia discussing Ed and her wish for him to live in peace. Frantic, Alexis asked why he was seeing things that never happened and why he was shown these memories. The voice returned, explaining it was not an illusion, but a potential future from long ago, and these memories existed. It showed Alexis the final battle in the demon realm, with Tia and Gonzo fighting desperately. The voice said that despite being loved by the people, the hero's promises remained unfulfilled, and in the end, nothing remained. Alexis clicked his tongue and tried to pull the sword again, but failed. The voice questioned whether someone like him truly considered himself a hero and if he was worthy. It said a hero gives everything to save the world. The voice accused Alexis of being too stubborn, saying he would rather rot in his own pride than dedicate himself to his duty. It declared that ahead lay the end of the hero's charade and the doom of the human world. Just like in the vision, Alexis handed Tia the teleportation crystal. Outside, the three continued fighting the golems until the biggest one stirred and approached the motionless Alexis. The voice asked him once more if he was truly a hero. Alexis replied that he had no way of knowing if he was truly a hero just because he had been called one. Maybe he thought he was special because others called him that, so he played the part he was given. Ultimately, he admitted he wasn't a true hero. Ed called out to him, but Alexis added that it's those around him who make him special. The difference between those born great and those who work hard to become great. Ed helped him realize this. With that, Ed proclaimed he would surpass the voice's truth and create his own because he is a hero. Then, pulling the sword out, a flash of light beamed, followed by a powerful slash that cut the biggest stone golem in half, the force piercing through the forest. Alexis stood holding the glowing holy sword. Tia called it pretty, saying it looked as if someone had sharpened the moon itself. Alexis stared at the blade, marveling at its power, clutching it tightly. He proclaimed he could break through the impregnable demon world and reach the demon lord. Correcting himself, Alexis said with this power and all their support pushing him forward, he truly believed they could defeat the demon lord. Alexis then took his place as the hero, moonlight subtly shining in his eyes. They talked about the technique he had just used before the battle with the demon lord. Gonzo told Alexis to get some rest, promising to take over the night watch. Alexis asked about Tia and Ed, and Gonzo explained they were also exhausted and already sleeping. Alexis thanked Gonzo for staying by his side so long. Gonzo, a little surprised, asked if something was wrong, wondering if Alexis worried about not making it through the fight with the demon lord. Alexis shook his head, saying it wasn't that. He just needed to be prepared because he deserved to live his own life. Gonzo raised an eyebrow, asking if Alexis thought he wasn't ready. Alexis assured him he was, but there were others who might not be as prepared. With a smirk, Gonzo replied, maybe they couldn't expect the same from Tia and Ed, but he'd protect everyone with his strength. Alexis told Gonzo that if the time came, he should forgive him for being selfish. Gonzo laughed, but then suddenly noticed something and shouted a warning. Gonzo quickly activated his AA shield and asked if Alexis had spotted their target. Alexis said he hadn't, unable to track it because of too many obstacles. Alexis told him to step back, saying he would handle it by wiping them out with a secret technique. He activated his power, Full Moon Light Sword, and with a flash created a bubble of light around his weapon before dashing forward. Gonzo watched, impressed. Meanwhile, Alexis asked Tia if she was ready, and when she confirmed, he pointed to the tallest tree indicating where their target was hiding. Tia used her magic Tempest Ray and fired an arrow straight at it. The vast, deep forest separated the human and demon worlds, a forbidden territory filled with dangerous magical beasts. Alexis recalled how, 10 years ago in the future, his past self had carried Tia through this very place using a forbidden skill. That journey had been an exception. Attempting to cross normally would be nearly impossible without the powers of a hero. Afterward, they sat together around the fire, reflecting that if they had made it this far, they should be able to handle what was ahead. Tia suggested they needed a break and mentioned how much she missed Ed's home-cooked meals since they'd been living off preserved food lately. Ed laughed, promising that when they returned to town, he'd make her the most delicious meal. Gonzo agreed, saying a good meal alone was enough to keep him going. Then they turned to Alexis, asking if he was all right after using such a powerful move. He assured them he was fine, but Alexis admitted that he still wasn't very good at controlling the sword yet, though he promised he'd get better soon. After all, he was a hero. Tia noted how she had thought it would take them years to challenge the Demon Lord, yet it had only been 6 months since they met Ed, and now they had come this far. Gonzo agreed while Ed grew quiet, reflecting on those 6 months. He remembered one of the conditions to return to the White World was to be part of a hero party for more than 6 months, which he had already fulfilled. The next step would be his exile. Lost in thought, Ed was quietly pondering his place in the group. Gonzo commented that a single day spent together was worth more than a decade. Ed looked at Alexis, who now wielded his true holy sword, making him the strongest person in the world. Together with Tia and Gonzo, they made the best hero party. But Ed couldn't help but wonder about his own role. Though they fought together, Ed's goal was different. He suspected they all wanted to stay in this world, while he longed to return home. Sometimes, he wondered if he could keep living there. But deep down, after all he had seen, his heart still yearned for more. Feeling a little sad, Ed watched Gonzo and Tia cheering with water, excited and ready to face the Demon Lord. Suddenly, Ed asked everyone what their plans were after defeating the Demon Lord. They were surprised by the question, but Tia smiled and asked if Alexis would become king. They all laughed at the thought. Alexis then turned to Gonzo, asking if he would return to the Eastern Kingdom. Gonzo nodded, saying he couldn't just vanish without reporting back, but promised he'd come back to visit soon. When Alexis asked Tia about her plans, she looked thoughtful and said she'd love to travel the world. She explained her excitement and suggested they could all meet up to share stories of their journeys. Alexis and Gonzo smiled, happy to hear her answer. Meanwhile, Ed stayed silent, listening seriously to everyone's responses while still thinking about his own path. Tia then asked Ed about his plans. Taking a deep breath, Ed said he'd return to his hometown, bringing back some souvenirs. He smiled and mentioned it was a peaceful rural village. Hearing this, everyone was excited to learn more. Tia asked him to share his contact information, saying she didn't want him to just disappear. Gonzo agreed, adding that even if the party disbanded, they were comrades who had fought together, and their bond would always remain. Seeing Gonzo's conviction, Alexis joked that maybe Gonzo was getting drunk on water. Just then, with a serious expression, Ed looked at Alexis and asked him to make sure he defeated the Demon Lord. Alexis firmly replied that he intended to keep his promise. Ed extended his fist and asked Alexis to promise with him to defeat the Demon Lord no matter what it took. Alexis was a bit surprised, but then returned the fist bump, promising he would absolutely defeat the Demon Lord. This was the first of what Ed felt would be 100 goodbyes, knowing he wouldn't see the journey through to the end. While everyone rested in their tents, Ed kept watch, thinking he wanted to give everything he had so he'd have no regrets. Suddenly, Gonzo woke up and stepped outside, telling Ed he could rest now as he'd take over the watch. Ed asked about Tia, and Gonzo replied she was sleeping peacefully. Wondering if something was wrong, Ed hesitated, then asked Gonzo if he wanted to ask him anything. Gonzo was puzzled by the question, But Ed had already resolved that he wouldn't carry any regrets or let anything hold him back. This was his final task before his exile. Now, in the present, as they ran toward their destination, Gonzo happily pointed out that they'd finally reached the end of the demon world. It had taken them nearly a month, but they were there at last. Alexis announced that he would clear the way, and with a single powerful strike, opened a path forward. Watching this, Ed chuckled to himself, thinking maybe this was why the first hero party had been wiped out. Ahead of them, the demon lord waited, smirking villainously as he welcomed them, surrounded by his monsters, clearly excited for the final showdown. With a smirk, the monster who seemed to be the general taunted Alexis, saying only a true hero like him could make it through the demon world. He questioned whether he could face the army in his exhausted state. Hearing this, Ed replied, asking if the general wasn't exaggerating a bit. He added that Alexis would carve everyone's signature neatly into the general's body with his only sword, inviting anyone interested in a hero's autograph to line up. The general laughed and asked if this really was the hero he had heard about. According to his reports, the person who supposedly cornered a high-ranking leader wasn't a hero, but just a black-haired baggage carrier. Suddenly, a voice from the general's eye repeated that Alexis was indeed the hero. Shocked, Alexis and the others wondered if such a creature could actually exist. Ed, staying calm, asked the general if he would let the others go if he stayed behind. The general just laughed, saying that was nonsense. He intended to end them all right there with his full army. Alexis realized they needed to defeat the demon forces before moving forward, and remarked that demons were really foolish, acting so superior while saying pointless things. Enraged, the general shouted that he would kill them and ordered his monsters to attack. As the monsters charged, Alexis prepared his holy sword and turned to Ed, saying, "Let's finish this in the blink of an eye." Ed nodded with a slight smile, but Tia cautioned them not to use too much energy, reminding them they still had to face the demon lord. Gonzo agreed and shouted with determination for them to leave the monsters to him and Tia. With fierce resolve, Gonzo charged forward while Tia used her magic to attack, unleashing powerful spells that wiped out many monsters at once. Chaos erupted around them as the general commanded his monsters to focus on wearing down the heroes, using their bodies to drain the group's strength. The general was also taken aback by Al's magic, realizing no matter what he did, he couldn't match their power. Observing their defense, he muttered in disbelief that it wasn't what he had been told, and their magic showed no signs of fading. Growing anxious, he shouted and ordered the ground beneath them to collapse. Suddenly, the earth cracked beneath their feet. Shocked, the group wondered if it was a trap, but Tia quickly created a protective bubble around them, cushioning their fall as they descended. Alexis noted that simply falling like that wasn't ideal and said they needed support to counter it. Just then, Ed glanced down and froze, realizing there was a massive snake waiting below. He quickly warned everyone to hold on to something, and Tia used her magic to create an earthly arm that caught them, keeping them from falling into the giant snake's mouth. Gonzo took a stance in front of the monster while the others held onto its massive head. The snake sneered, asking if they thought they could escape, and threatened to break through their defenses. Gonzo smirked, remarking that he never thought something so huge could even fly, then lunged forward to strike the monster. As the snake fixated on him, Ed took his chance, slashing his sword at its head and telling everyone to prepare for a wild and breezy ride. The snake writhed in vain from Ed's blow and began thrashing about at high speed. Ed called out to Tia to use her wind magic to shield them, explaining they needed it to keep steady or they might all crash. Suddenly, they found themselves hovering above the ground, smoke swirling all around them. One wondered if their plan had worked. Tia nodded, saying it was close, but she had managed just in time. He handed her a potion, saying she used a lot of magic, then tossed one to Gonzo as well. Gonzo smirked, declaring that no amount of damage could weaken his muscles, but Ed insisted he'd take the potion to restore his magical strength. Just then, Alexis called Ed's attention to their surroundings, pointing out that it looked like they had arrived, though it didn't quite match what they'd expected. They all stared ahead, realizing they were now standing at the edge of the true demon world. Tia voiced concern, asking if entering directly wasn't too risky. Gonzo replied that they had just overcome one obstacle, and if they left the demon army behind, they'd risk being attacked from both sides. Tia agreed, acknowledging they couldn't ignore the danger. At that moment, Alexis asked for their attention. He thanked each of them for staying by his side and explained that the place was a death zone. Unlike him, a hero with a destiny to fulfill, they had their own lives to protect. He asked if they would keep fighting by his side until the end. Ed thought Alexis was just acting out of pride and determination, traits that had driven him to support Tia earlier, but now he seemed uncertain, even vulnerable. Tia and Gonzo shared a smile and agreed they would obviously go together. Alexis was visibly moved by their response, but Ed suddenly left, admitting he was relieved they were strong enough to go without him. Then, with a sad expression, he apologized and revealed he wouldn't be joining them. Alexis was completely taken aback. Tia asked if he was joking, but Ed assured her he was serious and apologized again. She was surprised, reminding him that he had promised to stay until the end. Ed explained that he had been thinking about this for a long time. If he stayed and fought to defeat the Demon Lord with them, he wondered if he would still have a chance to return to his homeworld. The question lingered. If Alexis lost his role as the hero after the Demon Lord's defeat, would it still fulfill the terms of Ed's exile from the hero's party? Ed realized he wouldn't know until he tried, but if it didn't work, he might never be able to return home. He left Alexis unsure about risking his own life on a gamble, making him feel torn about the decision. He thought again that Ed was choosing to leave in the middle of their journey. Then Alexis spoke up, acknowledging it was a difficult choice at such a crucial time. He said that as a hero, they seemed weak compared to Ed, but he understood that for an ordinary person like him, it was still a matter of life and death. Tia was shocked to hear Alexis say that, but he continued, explaining that this was truly what Ed wanted, to go back home, so he had made the right decision. Alexis said he respected Ed's choice, and that this was where they would say their farewells. Alexis thanked Ed for the Holy Sword, saying it would help him easily cut through their weaker forces. Then he told Ed to go on and teleported away just before the battle started. Tia turned to Gonzo and asked if he was okay with Ed's decision. This made Gonzo recall the conversation he had with Ed outside the tent. Ed had mentioned how strong the three of them had become, and how he felt sorry for the Demon Lord for what was coming. Gonzo reminded him that it wasn't just the three of them. It was the four of them together that made them the hero's party. During that conversation, Ed had asked Gonzo for a favor. Gonzo had been curious, and Ed explained that once they broke through the demon world, a massive army would be waiting to ambush them. Gonzo confidently thought if it was the same kind of army as before, they could take them down. But Ed warned this time the army was much larger and stronger. Gonzo saw it as a chance to weaken their numbers before the final showdown. Ed walked away, mentioning that they had barely rested and had been fighting non-stop for days. Gonzo agreed it was impossible to stay in top form under those conditions, even though they kept winning. Ed pointed out that they were all starting to feel the strain, and asked Gonzo if they really believed they could defeat the Demon Lord in such an exhausted state. Above all, Ed wanted to make sure Alexis could reach the Demon Lord, and Gonzo shared that goal. Ed told them they needed to make logical decisions when the time came and asked Gonzo if, just like he had always had their backs, he could have his back too when the moment arrived. As Ed handed the heavy bag back to Gonzo, he said it should be no problem for him to carry it, with a serious look. Gonzo asked if this was the moment Ed had spoken about before. Ed nodded, saying he was counting on him. Gonzo took the bag and told both Alexis and Tia to follow him as they headed out. Tia hesitated, asking if it was right to go in the opposite direction when the Demon Lord's army was ahead. Ed simply started walking away. Gonzo grabbed Alexis's hand firmly. Confused and frustrated, Alexis demanded he let go, asking what was happening angrily. Alexis told Gonzo that sacrificing a comrade to advance was wrong, but Gonzo cast a magic barrier around them to stop Alexis from going back. Alexis, still angry, shouted that he would never accept Gonzo's actions. Watching them, Ed smiled to himself, thinking he knew Alexis would react this way. He knew how selfless Alexis was, seeing how he would save Tia first and then himself. The Demon Lord, determined to crush Ed, ordered his entire army to advance. Ed stood ready, thinking that if he could take out the army here, Alexis and the others would only have to face the Demon Lord himself. Alexis argued that since the Demon Lord was after him specifically, he should be the one to face him. Growing frustrated, Gonzo told Alexis that if he truly was the hero, he needed to understand Ed's resolve. He challenged Alexis, asking what a hero should be doing right now. Alexis paused, reflecting on past moments when he believed he could have done more, or perhaps should have. Meanwhile, Tia felt sad, remembering when Ed had told her he didn't want their efforts to go to waste. She wondered if letting him go like this was really the right choice. Alexis glanced over at Ed, who watched him with a calm smile. Ed's expression seemed to silently ask whether Alexis would stubbornly let his pride stop him from fulfilling his duty. Then Ed raised his fist, the same way he had when he made Alexis promise to defeat the Demon Lord. Seeing this, Alexis's eyes widened in shock, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Ed turned to Alexis and asked if he would exile him from the party, saying he was running away. Tia shouted that she wouldn't accept this and begged Alexis to stop him, but Gonzo held her back as she struggled to break free. With tears in his eyes, Alexis took a deep breath and threw his sword toward Ed, officially exiling him from the party. Ed caught the sword and, with a sad smile, told Alexis to make sure he'd come back someday to take it back, calling him his friend. He thanked him, and as he did, the conditions for his return were met. Now he had only 10 minutes left before he would be sent back to his own world. As he walked away, Ed silently apologized to Tia and entrusted her to Gonzo's care. He thought about how he had once again made them cry. Alexis and Tia stood there, both torn and wondering if they should go with him. Tia remembered being the only survivor of her past, and now that painful feeling had returned. She couldn't hold back her tears. Gonzo urged them to pull themselves together, saying they'd only waste Ed's sacrifice if they stayed like this. Tia protested, knowing Gonzo didn't truly want this either, but he reminded her that Ed had entrusted him to see them through this and that he wouldn't let Ed down. As they moved forward, Ed, holding the holy sword, faced the general and his army. The general taunted, remarking that the hero and his party could now advance, but he would crush Ed and catch up to them soon after. Ed grinned and asked the general if he really believed he had a future. With fierce determination, Ed charged at the army, declaring that he would bring about their end. The monsters noticed a sudden shift in Ed's aura as he stood alone in front of the army. One sneered, realizing that Ed truly had guts. Meanwhile, Tia remembered how Ed would sometimes make certain expressions when they first met, when he was making their weapons. It was as if he was gazing out a window, watching children play outside. She thought his expression often seemed to say that he was the only one who didn't belong there. Tia desperately wanted to show him that it wasn't true, even if it meant risking her life. Just then, a monster appeared in front of them, a grass gear guard. It sneered, saying it hadn't expected them to show up, but now that they had, it wouldn't waste the chance to tear them apart. Tia thought to herself that the place Ed longed for was beyond her imagination. If that was the case, she couldn't choose a future for him or ignore his wishes and turn back to stop him. She knew she had to keep moving forward. Alexis was ready, but Tia asked Gonzo to let her down, assuring him that she was okay now. Gonzo hesitated, but she insisted, so he reluctantly let her go. The monster sneered, mocking Alexis for sacrificing one of his weak comrades, calling it a plan fit only for a spineless hero like him. However, Tia quickly began casting her magic. She summoned the Stormbringer and infused her silver spirit sword with its power. A powerful tornado formed, tearing through the monster in the blink of an eye. Turning to Alexis, Tia said, "Let's go and defeat the Demon Lord." She knew that to reach the future Ed had longed for, the other side of the window, she had to keep moving forward. On the other side, Ed was battling monsters. When the monster noticed the barrier had been breached, it quickly called for reinforcements. It wondered who this man was and why he was so strong despite not being a hero. Ed relentlessly cut down enemies with his sword. He had activated his Exiled skill, which boosted all of his abilities 100-fold. The intense energy surged through him, causing steam to escape from his body. However, if he kept pushing himself like this, his heart would give out within 10 minutes, and he would die. The monster, seeing Ed's constant movement, decided to stop him by disrupting his momentum. It used its power to erase gravity, causing both the monsters and Ed to float in the air. But Ed's movements were now hindered. The monster caught him and used a skill, Destruction Nova, causing a massive explosion. After the blast, a huge hole formed. The monster laughed loudly, saying it had taken some time to deal with that weakling, but the farce was over. It ordered Gigano to chase down the hero while it reorganized the troops. However, Gigano replied that he had lost his authority since the army had fallen, and now he would defeat the hero himself. Furious, the monster reminded Gigano that their true enemy was the hero, and that this was not the time for power struggles. They had to prioritize killing the hero once and for all. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of them, surrounded by steam. Ed, moving at the speed of light, charged towards Gigano and drove his sword into him, shouting that they weren't going anywhere. With one powerful strike, he sliced through the middle of Gigano's body. The monster was shocked to see Ed still alive. It demanded to know how Ed had survived.